It was sometime in April, peak corona time in my state. Quarantining and lockdown were still in effect. There was nothing to do on Friday and Saturday nights besides Zoom calls with your friends. It was like a week after I finally hopped on the wave and agreed to jump on a Zoom call with my 4 friends, Ashley, Haley, Sylvia, and Alexa. It was a Friday night, and it was supposed to be our little Zoom drinking party. We were going to be playing drinking games and just staying up until the early hours of the morning. Ashley shared the link to join the Zoom call in our iMessage group chat. We joined one at a time, first Ashley, then me, then Haley and Sylvia. It seemed they were all on their laptops. I was the only one on my phone, so I switched to my laptop as well. It took a little while for Alexa to finally join, but when she joined, her screen was black. We all joked around, chanting Alexa's name and whatever, asking her what's up with her webcam. She started typing into the text chat of the Zoom call saying she didn't know what was wrong with her webcam and microphone, that it said both were offline. We continued to joke around about it, but also tried helping her, though we didn't really know how to be of much assistance with that. Eventually she typed in the chat, "BRB, I'm gonna go try to figure this out." So we all went on to our drinking and just chatting on our video chat, while we figured Alexa was doing whatever to try to fix her computer. But something randomly happened sometime into our call. Something completely unexpected that kind of scarred all of us. Alexa's cam suddenly started working, and her box went from black to showing an old creepy man doing something I really don't want to repeat. When he noticed the camera turned on, he jumped to close the laptop, and the screen went dark again. The 4 of us screamed and started freaking out. We tried calling Alexa, but now it seemed her phone was off. We didn't have her mom or sister's number, so we all agreed to drive over to Alexa's place to see what was going on. Her mom answered the door in her robe, looking concerned. We asked her if Alexa was home. She said yes and called her down. Alexa never responded though. Her mother said she had just gotten home an hour ago, but that Alexa's door was locked half an hour earlier. We all explained what happened on the Zoom call, and she freaked out and ran upstairs to bang on Alexa's door. That got no answers. We all got a sickly feeling when we realized what could be going on. Alexa's mom called the cops that second, and when Officer Perry showed up, we told him everything. He called for backup and went upstairs to knock on the door and tried to reason with whoever could be in there. When there was no response, he began to kick the door down. When he finally broke through the door, there was no one on the bed. The laptop and phone were left on the bed, but no one was in the room. The window was wide open, enough for someone to crawl through and hop outside down to the awning roof below. We all found Alexa in the basement minutes later. She was hiding under a blanket in the corner of the room. She said when she was home alone, she saw some older man with a big knife sticking out of his pocket in the living room, so she snuck down to the basement and hid. She didn't know when it was safe to come out of hiding, as she couldn't hear her mother getting home. Police backup finally showed up, and the information of the break-in and the man was sent to the local news outlets to alert people to be on the lookout. It's crazy how that Zoom call might have saved Alexa and her mother's lives. A few weeks ago, my friends and I decided to hold a Zoom reunion, as we had not seen each other for quite some time, and all of us finally had the time to chat since there was a lockdown in our country. We're all college students, and most of us had lost contact with each other, so we decided to post on our social media that we would be holding a Zoom reunion, which was open to all the alumni of our old school. We got responses from many people, and we even accepted people we didn't know as long as they knew our mutual friends. We wanted it to be a big social event and didn't really care who joined. Finally, the day of the reunion arrived. I scheduled a meeting and posted it on my Instagram story because there were too many people to individually text, which I now realize was a big mistake because I had basically given everyone access to join the Zoom call. The Zoom meeting began normally, with all of us excited to meet our old friends. We made some new friends through our mutual friends, and we were having a grand time, when someone called Sat_An_20 unmuted their mic and started making groaning sounds. We had a friend named Anne, so we thought it was just her pranking us. We texted her to stop because it was getting annoying, but to our surprise she texted back apologizing because she hadn't attended the call due to prior engagements. We were surprised and asked this Ann person to open their video and show us their face, or they would be removed from the meeting. They didn't show their face, so I removed them from the meeting. The Zoom call resumed, and we were all joking about the incident. Suddenly, my network strength became weak, and I had to leave the meeting. I joined back soon after, but SatAn20 had somehow taken the opportunity and re-entered the meeting in the few seconds that we unlocked it. This time they began to share their screen and displayed a video of a black tunnel on loop. We were terrified, and a lot of people were leaving the meeting because of it, but my friends and I were determined to find the person who was destroying our reunion. We constantly tried to remove them from the meeting, but the second my friend's network connection weakened, somehow the SatAn20 person became the host. There was nothing we could do now. The account was still playing the video on loop and chanting something in a strange language. We could have left the meeting, but really wanted to know who was disrupting it. Suddenly, the video stopped, and SatAn20 started talking in a distorted voice about how my brother Rav had completed the ritual and attained salvation, and we could take their help and do the same too. Here's the thing. I had a twin brother who died before birth. My parents had wanted to name him Rav. They told me when I was very young about his prenatal death, and begged me to never talk about him. Only my grandparents and parents knew about him, as the subject was too painful to disclose to others. I had always wanted a twin, and blaming myself for his death, I never told anyone about him. Soon after, we had moved to a new city. I was certain that the only people who knew about my brother in the city were my parents. I had not told even my best friends about him. I had no idea how this SatAn20 person knew about him. They truly had no way of knowing that I knew about. With shaking hands, and now without a doubt convinced that this was a supernatural occurrence, I wordlessly exited the meeting. I do not know what happened afterwards. I didn't respond to my friends' texts and have since not talked to them. To this day, I know this is an experience I will not soon forget. In April of this year, my school had made a virtual classroom thing where we would do all of our assignments online on websites like Google Classroom and whatnot. They also told us about a new tool called Zoom, where students and teachers can all have a virtual meeting to talk about schoolwork and stuff. Well, one day in May, after I finished my assignments, my dad went out on a night shift at his job. So it was only my mom and my mom was asleep. I called my friends, and we all agreed to try a Zoom call out with each other to catch up on how everyone has been, and it also eventually ended with us playing some console games like Call of Duty. At one point, around 10 p.m., we were playing Modern Warfare, and all of a sudden, one of my friends, who I'll call Jack for privacy reasons, suddenly told me that he saw a very sudden blurred movement behind me in my room, but he wasn't sure because my lights were off, and the only light was from the TV in my room. I have a somewhat small room with only my bed, a drawer next to my bed, a closet in the left corner of the room, and my TV in the front. That's when I noticed that my pillow was on the floor. I went over to pick it up, and I just dismissed it thinking it accidentally fell or something. So I just went back to play with my friends. About 10 minutes passed by, and Jack once again says he swears he sees movement behind me in my room. When I turned around, I saw that the pillow had fallen again in the exact same spot. This time I became anxious because I knew 100% I put the pillow in a place that it couldn't possibly fall without someone or something moving it. I bend down slowly to pick it up, and then I hear Jack scream. I put the pillow on the bed and rushed over to my laptop sitting on my chair to ask him what was wrong. All he said was to look under my bed, and I saw it. I saw two glowing eyes which were lit up by the TV screen. Once the person realized that I saw them, they immediately jumped out and tried to grab me. I instinctively swung my arm at their head, and I hit him right in the nose. He looked to be at least 45 and had long, dry, straight hair that looked like it hadn't been cut or washed in at least a year. He had a scratchy-looking beard and was a very skinny but tall guy. He looked to be about 6'3". He fell onto my bed, and I could see his nose was bleeding, so I took my chance and ran to my mom's room and locked the door. I could hear his footsteps stomping through the house coming towards the room, so I immediately told my mom to call the police despite her groggily shouting at me to tell her what was happening. She called the cops, and by then I could hear his footsteps as he was going from room to find where I went. When he came to the room we were in, he tried the handle, and when he saw it was locked, he knew we were in the room. But he didn't bang on the door like I thought he would. Instead, I heard a small chuckle, and then I looked under the little crack under the door, and I could see his feet standing there. As soon as I looked under, he looked through the crack as well, and I could see his bloodshot eye. I also saw a couple drops of blood on the floor, and then on the other side of the door, I heard "You'll pay for that" in a psychotic, high-pitched childish voice. When I backed away, he screamed like a madman and started banging on the door over and over. I started covering my ears, trying to shut the sound out, and I could see my mom crying. Just then, we hear the sirens outside, but the man doesn't stop banging and shouting. The police knock on the door, and when they hear the man, they immediately knock the door down and come in. Literally like something from a movie. I heard the man stop, and I thought the police already got him. When I opened the door, I saw the man facing the two officers, looking like he was going to attack them. When he stepped towards them, one of them shot a taser at him, and he immediately fell and started shaking violently. They cuffed him and took him out to the car, and a third officer came to question me and my mom. I told him the whole story, and then the three officers started searching for the place of breaking and entering. And it turned out that he had broken in through the window in my dad's office room, and they found a small axe and drill under my bed in my room. We later found out this man wasn't documented, and no one knew who he was, and he didn't appear to have any family. He was sent to a mental institution, but that's not the worst part. The police later tried to find out where the man originally lived, and all the man told them was that he lived in the woods near my home. When the police went searching for his home for any evidence, they found a small secluded area in the woods with a small wooden shack. When they went in, they told us that they found multiple weapons, bags of old food, and worst of all, 2 pictures of me, one of me asleep, which was taken from inside the house outside my bedroom door, and one of me eating dinner from outside the window. I hope nothing like this ever happens to anyone, and I hope no one else has to add another bad memory to the long list from this terrible year. I used to play basketball back in high school. I was never really too good or anything. I just played so I could say I played a sport and to put something on my college resume. This one particular game, we were playing some nearby school, I can't remember the name of it, but we were home. This wasn't a very important game, so not a lot of people were watching in the bleachers. I think we were down like 22-13 when some kid on the other team started trash talking me and a few of my teammates, but mostly me, making fun of my size and my hair. It got to the point where after every shot I missed, the kid would throw some wise-ass comment my way. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore and I shoved the kid as hard as I could. He fell on his back, sliding off the court. My teammates held his teammates back from attacking me as the ref blew his whistle and ejected me from the game. I didn't care, it felt way too good to feel bad about it. I walked right past my coach, not even batting an eye, and went straight for the locker room. The door was locked for some reason. I didn't want to have to awkwardly ask my coach to go unlock it, so I went outside and went around to the other side of the boys' locker room where there was an outside entrance. Strangely, that one was open. That door was never left open. As I stepped into the locker room, I realized it was as cold in there as it was outside. The door must have been open all game. The lights also weren't on, and I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't use the flashlight or anything. I shut the back entrance door and began feeling around the walls like a blind person, looking for the light switch. Over the sound of my skin rubbing against the brick wall, I heard a locker click. The sound of one of the lockers closing. I confidently called out, "Who's there?" assuming it was one of my teammates. No reply. It was dark in there, but not the kind of dark where you can't see anything. I began a slow walk down past the aisles, scanning each one for anybody who could have made that sound. And all the while I heard footsteps in the room, so I knew I wasn't alone. I got to the last aisle and saw for a mere second at the opposite side of the aisle someone really big moving behind the lockers as if they were hiding. I felt my heart skip a beat and was officially freaked out, so I decided to just leave and wait for the game to end to get my stuff. I made my way to the main entrance and tried to pull the door open, but it was locked from the inside too. I found the light switch right next to the door though, and the return of light made me feel a little better. With the light on, I gained the confidence to just confront whoever was in the locker room. Again, I started doing laps around the locker aisles, but I didn't see anyone. However, I still heard the footsteps opposite me wherever I went. If I was in one aisle, I heard the footsteps exactly opposite me in the next aisle over. I continuously called out, "Who's there?" I never even got so much as a cough in response. I became almost out of breath walking and running around the aisles so much. I then looked at the lockers and realized that in between them were tiny holes in which you could see over to the next aisle. I had an idea. I could peek through one of those holes and see who was on the other side. And so I quietly got on my knees and put my eye up to one of the holes. At first, all I thought I saw on the other side was darkness, as if something were blocking it. But I quickly realized what it was. What I was looking at through that hole was an eye. I ran out that back door quicker than I'd ever run in any of my games. When I went up to my coach, who understandably looked annoyed at me, I told him there was someone in the locker room. At first he assumed it was just the janitor, but after I convinced him it wasn't, he looked at me with a look on his face that told me he believed me. After the next call, he told the refs to pause the game, that there might be an intruder in the locker room. Half of my team and the coach went in to investigate, but by that time whoever was in there was gone. I didn't feel stupid or anything, as everyone seemed to believe me. I mean, the room was freezing and the back door was still open, for crying out loud. What we did find out at the end of the game, however, was that 4 of my teammates were missing their clothes from their lockers. All of them from the freshman locker aisle. I think I figured out what kind of person I was in that locker room with, and I'm just happy I never caught him. My brother's a hockey player, but he's only 13 years old, so I have to drive him to his games and practices a lot. His team always plays in an outdoor rink, so it usually gets really cold out. A couple weeks ago, I took my brother to his game, and since I usually get bored when I stay at his games, I took my girlfriend Michelle to watch with me. My brother's team was down like 4-0 by the end of the first period, and we really weren't enjoying it anymore, so me and Michelle decided to go to a more private location, not for anything sexual, just to smoke the stuff we brought with us. She's not a big smoker, but I'm usually able to convince her to light up with me. The park that this rink is in is very foresty. About half of it is nothing but dense forest. Locals call it the Burning Woods for obvious reasons. Me and Michelle found a good spot behind a few big trees, and a few moments later, after lighting the bowl, we heard footsteps approaching us. I put the lighter and pipe away quicker than I even had time to think about it. We heard a chuckle as 2 guys lower to mid-20s came into light. One of them had a painfully cliched mohawk with a green stripe and black fuzzy hair beneath. The other a big bald guy with a goatee. The guy with the mohawk laughed and said, "It's cool, don't worry about it. You got enough for 2 more?" My first instinct was to say, "Piss off, I'm spending time with my girlfriend." But for some reason the words that came out were, "Yeah, I think so." I'm a serious coward. I always think of appropriate things to say in my head, but I never gather the courage to actually say it. After I said yeah, he told me he was just kidding, but that he had some super dope Durban poison or something in his car if we were interested. I looked at Michelle, who shrugged her shoulders. but I knew deep down she didn't want to go with them, just like I didn't. I then looked in the direction of the hockey game. I told them, nah, it's okay, we were just finishing up anyway. The guy just nodded his head and said, oh. He stuck out his hand for a goodbye high five / handshake, and I shook his hand. I directed Michelle back in the direction of the hockey rink. We both agreed that those guys were weird. We stopped when we thought they were far away. It's not like there wasn't any point in not smoking just because of that encounter. I gave Michelle the pipe and lighter, and as she flicked it, I could swear I heard footsteps moving through the leaves again. I did a quick side glance about 2 o'clock, and I knew he was there. The guy with the green mohawk. He was standing behind a tree with his head just kind of peering out from it. I did that thing with my eyes, looking over in that direction to kind of hint at it to Michelle. I didn't want to confront the guy, because at this point I knew something was wrong with these guys. And as I was already having no part of this, we both heard a stick snap from right behind the tree we were standing by. I pulled Michelle with me as we walked back closer to the hockey rink and back into the light. At this point I lost interest in smoking. I just wanted to go back to the safety of the bleachers. We made it past the tree line and back onto the path when we heard one of the guys call out, "Hey, come back." We turned around and there they were. The 2 guys standing by the edge of the tree line, maybe 20 feet away from us, with haunting smiles on their faces. And then I looked past them and saw a 3rd guy behind them, half covered by a tree. "No, it's okay guys, thanks," I yelled back. "It wasn't a request." Those words hit me like a bullet. I dared not turn around. I simply nudged Michelle forward even faster to the bleachers that were now only about 50 feet away. I feared if I turned around I'd see a gun or something in his hands. We made it back safely to the bleachers with the feeling of comfort being around other people. The game ended and my brother's team lost 9-5. My brother stayed after a bit to speak with his coach, who was offering him a position on his other team, and by the time he was done, just about everyone had already left. With 3 cars in the parking lot, we all got into my truck and went home. But on the way out of the parking lot, I noticed immediately that the car behind us was tailgating and then shortly after started honking. I knew it was them. It had to be. They must have waited for us in their car. Why were they targeting us specifically? We didn't do anything. By a lucky break though, we didn't even have to drive all the way down the street. Parked on the corner of a side road, seemingly waiting to give tickets to unsuspecting drivers, was a Ford Explorer police car. We pulled up next to it and the car behind us kept driving past. The cop rolled down his window and we pointed at the car, telling him that those guys were harassing us. All the cop did was nod his head and say okay before rolling up his window. I took that as our cue to drive away, but I drove slowly hoping to see his car turn on along with his lights. They didn't. For whatever reason, he didn't care to chase them down. 2 weeks later, it still bothers me every day, and this whole situation still scares me every day. All my life, I'll never forget this experience. I've always had a close group of friends who I could relate to and that we all loved baseball. 6 of us were on the same team in a league, while all 8 of us consistently played pickup baseball with each other. We lived in the country, and there was this really low-key, convenient little clearing in the woods which had a baseball field and a basketball court. I shit you not, it was almost like our own little private park. Nobody else was ever there, mostly because nobody knew about it. It was off some dead-end dirt road with nothing on it, and it was surrounded by nothing but forest. We were all 11 or 12 years old at the time, and living in the country you tend to have parents who are a little more lenient with letting you out unsupervised. At least that's how it was for us. This field was about a quarter mile away from my house, so I always walked with my baseball bag containing my bat, glove, and a few extra balls. This was the day that ruined it for our whole group in this park. It was a Friday night, middle of July, so the sky was turning that deep orange as the sun was setting. That meant our game had to be wrapping up soon.
I was coincidentally up at bat when two of my friends who were out at field pointed to something. We all turned and saw a huge group of men entering the little clearing and sitting down on a nearby bench. There were 6 men. I guess thinking back now, I'd say they were in their 20s or 30s at the time. I wouldn't say that they had a gang-like appearance, but they sure didn't look like guys you'd want to run into in a dark alley. The disturbing part was that they all either sat or stood there just watching our group playing baseball, and I could see and hear them laughing and making a lot of noise. We all looked at each other and kind of mutually agreed to pack up, since it was getting late anyway. As we all started putting our stuff in our bags, they all started calling out, "Aw, don't leave." As we all high-fived each other saying our goodbyes, we looked back at the bench, and we got scared when we saw all 6 men were now standing up, still watching us. You may think this sounds dumb, how a group of 8 kids would get scared because some people entered a park, but you don't understand the way they were intently staring at us. Now here was the bad part. I usually tended to walk alone since my house was in a different direction of everyone else. I asked my friend Jordan to kind of escort me out of the clearing and to the dirt path that I walked on just so it wouldn't be so obvious that I'm walking alone. Then I gave him a high five and we went our separate ways. It was getting really dark now, in the woods especially. That's why I always kept a flashlight in my baseball bag. Every click and every snap in the woods made me shine my light over in paranoia. My heart was actually racing. I just wanted to get home safely and get to my nice warm bed. Each step in the dirt seemed to become louder and louder as I became more sensitive to the sounds around me. I felt sweat dripping down my cheek as I heard laughter and screaming in the near distance, not of my friends but of grown men. I picked up the pace, thus causing a few of the spare baseballs to fall out of my bag, which I had apparently forgotten to zip up. I sighed in annoyed breath, dropped the bag, and hurriedly looked for the balls with my flashlight. The subsequent snapping of leaves and twigs from behind me made my heart drop. I turned and shined my light to reveal a tall man in a black hooded sweatshirt with the hood covering his face inching his way closer to me. Only after I revealed him in the light, he wasn't inching anymore. He was full on running toward me. I felt life almost escape me as I ran for my life, dropping the flashlight and leaving all my baseball gear behind. I could hear my chaser behind me all the way until I saw the light from my house. I screamed for my mom and dad, and that's when I heard my chaser turn around. My mom and dad were hysterical in reaction to what I told them, and called all 7 of my friends' parents asking if their kids were alright and explaining the situation. Thankfully, all of my friends made it home okay that night, though my friend Jordan was actually followed briefly as well. He told me he wasn't chased after he started running though. After this incident, all of our parents stopped allowing us to go to that field. We still live in the same house, and it still makes me a bit uncomfortable knowing that one of those men, therefore all of them, know where I live. I was on the deep web after hearing all the craze about it. I had to go on Reddit to get the really interesting links. Most of the links just took you to pages that would list hundreds of other pages. At first, it just seemed like an endless cycle of pointless pages, until I somehow landed on a very dark-themed website. I don't mean it was a horror-themed scary story website. I mean the banner had the disgusting and disturbing picture of what looked like a girl no older than 12, blindfolded with slits in her mouth and bruises all over her face. I never knew how dark the internet can get, but I knew right after seeing that picture, it can only get worse on that website. I could have and should have just closed the browser or clicked the back button then and there, but something possessed me to click through the forums on each and every forum post. They were all littered with gut-wrenching, brutal and sadistic pictures of children, from babies and toddlers all the way up to a 16-year-old girl, all being tortured. I don't even want to describe what I saw, but I want you to understand the true horrors that go on in the deep web and in this world. One post was titled, "Followed 10-year-old home successfully, knocked out and brought back." I dared click on it and saw pictures of an innocent 10-year-old boy who was originally on his way home from school, tied up to a chair attached to some kind of torture machine that looked as if it belonged in a Saw movie. I scrolled down and the pictures got worse. The device on his chair started to carve into his wrist. I couldn't even finish that post. I had to click back. I found another shocking post with a link to a video of a newborn child being dipped into a pot of boiling water. I could only watch about 10 seconds before closing the video. I would describe more, but I don't want to share any more of it for your own sake. However, the worst part that still kills me knowing this is that I used to be a camp counselor for about 4 years, and I had dealt with many hundreds of kids. A few years back, there was the very upsetting news that one of the kids attending the camp, one of the kids in my group, had gone missing. That was many years ago, and everyone since has just given her up for dead. That was confirmed when I clicked on one certain post. There was the dead body of an 8-year-old girl, almost completely mutilated, but face still recognizable. I instantly recognized the face as the girl who had gone missing so long ago. I literally threw up because of the horror I was feeling. I called the police and told them I need the cops right away. They showed up quickly and I showed them the screen, and then a picture of the missing child. They gave their own signs of disgust before giving me a lecture about how I went about reporting this wrong, that I shouldn't have called the cops or whatever. But they still took down the URL and thanked me for finding this. It took much longer than I hoped for the website to finally come down, but I have no idea if they ever caught the sick fuck that did that, or anybody that posted anything on this forum for that matter. I caught my brother browsing some weird website one night. It had pictures of guns and illegal drugs. He and I are really close, so we don't usually hide things from each other, so when I questioned him, he straight up told me he was buying weed on a website called Mr. Nice Guy Market. I told him that's illegal and that he would obviously get caught. Then he went on about telling me that he's safe and anonymous on the deep web. I assured him that that's complete nonsense, that everything is traceable, but he told me he's already used it at least 10 times and that I can't stop him. So I gave up and watched him make his purchase. He found some new listing of cannabis called The Poison Queen. It had one review which rated it positively. I suggested to him that he find one with more ratings, but he started acting like some kind of pro, telling me to relax. The seller was from the same state as us, which would make for quick delivery, claimed my brother. He did his thing. He used some kind of weird program to encrypt his message to the seller, which included his name, our address, and other info. I reminded him it was a mistake, but he told me everything is fine. About a week later, my brother started getting concerned that he got scammed because there was never any word from the seller. Coincidentally, on that same night, we got a heavy knock at the door. I got nervous that it was the police and that they caught on to my brother's illegal drug purchase, but it turned out to be much worse than just the police. He opened the door, and we were greeted by some sketchy-looking guy with medium-length hair, all fuzzy and messy, a brown, messy beard, a fat belly, and a very obviously fake Rolex on his wrist. He then said my brother's name, and I saw my brother step back a bit. The guy asked my brother if he was the one who bought the weed. My brother didn't know how to answer. All I heard him mumble was, "I thought you would ship it." The guy then started motioning for us to come out to his van. I told my brother not to, but he went out anyway. I had to follow him to make sure nothing happened. I didn't feel right about this situation. About halfway to his van, I noticed something in the passenger circular window in the back. There was somebody with a ski mask on, barely making themselves visible as they peered out to us. I saw the guy leading us to the van notice him and begin to motion with his hand for the guy to get down. At that moment, I grabbed my little brother and dragged him all the way back in the house. I didn't realize until it was almost too late that the guy was chasing me. I was able to shut the door and lock it. They saw there were no cars in the driveway, so they must have assumed our parents weren't home. The guy started banging and kicking at the door, and by some stroke of luck, a larger man walking with his dog passed by and noticed what was going on. He questioned the guy at the door, which seemed to scare him off. We watched as the van drove down the road out of sight. I was so anxious to tell my dad, even if it meant ratting out my brother, that I ran to my dad's car when he got home to greet him. I then noticed the same van halfway down the block, parked by the entrance of the cul-de-sac down the road. Only for a moment though, before it drove off seconds after I noticed. I haven't actually seen it since, and it's been 3 whole months. I think this was a good lesson for my brother to stop messing around on the web. I was on tour trying to find some really deep websites. I was in a chat room where people normally shared links to deeper websites and weird pictures and videos, commonly illegal pornography. Some guy named Vintage XXX posted a link without describing what it was. I clicked on it and it took me to a black screen where a big video box eventually popped up with a play button. The video thumbnail was a dark room only lit by a TV screen. Out of curiosity, I clicked play and began to hear the sound of TV static in the background as lines of static slowly swam down the video screen. There was no seek bar on this video. Then I noticed something slowly begin to emerge from behind the wall. It was a figure dressed in all black with some kind of black mask on as well. I started to suspect it was a jump scare video, and I thought I was right when the figure leaped out and ran to the screen in less than a second. It still got me even though I was expecting it, but then it got strange. The person had their face in front of the screen, slowly moving around as if he could see me and was observing me. Then I heard a crackly, demonic voice say something. It came from the video. It repeated itself, and I could make the phrase out to be, "Ask me something." I was really confused. I tried typing something, but there was nowhere to enter text. Then he said, "No, not the keyboard. Say something." I felt my heart punch the inside of my chest as he said this. I opened my mouth and mumbled the words, "You can hear me?" It responded with, "Yes." I was uncomfortable now. I thought it was a video. I pressed pause, but it didn't do anything. He said, "Don't try to leave. I want to talk." I tried moving the mouse to the exit button, but the mouse was frozen. In fact, none of the keys were responding on my keyboard. There was a long moment of silence before my webcam began flashing as if it were on, and my face popped up on the screen. "There, I got a picture of you now. Now just hang on while I get your address, and then we can meet." I started to panic, smashing every key on the keyboard, spazzing the mouse, but it did nothing. I had my finger on the power button, but it also didn't do anything. The computer wouldn't turn off. The voice was saying crazy things like, "You're stuck here. I will find you. Don't even bother." I snatched the screwdriver sitting on my desk, unscrewed the 4 screws on the bottom of my laptop, and took out the battery. The computer finally turned off. I was gasping for air as if I just ran a marathon. My heart was pounding 5 times as fast as it should have. I have since left my laptop off after that, and have resorted to using my desktop as my main computer. I'm sure by now nothing will happen. He definitely didn't have enough time to get my address.
With all this quarantining madness going on because of COVID-19, my family and I have fled New York State to our Massachusetts lake house to avoid contact with other people. The lake, which I will not name for safety reasons, has a bunch of houses surrounding it, and in the summer months, it's full of boats and people barbecuing and drinking. But right now, in late March when I'm writing this, it's kind of a ghost town here, and it's weird seeing it like this here. Anyway, I wouldn't be here writing this if something didn't go wrong, right? My younger brothers, who I'll call Steve and Glenn, were out on the deck overlooking the lake with me. We were setting up the table for a game of beer pong, which we invited our dad to play with us so the teams would be even. The sky had reached that point after sunset where most of the sky was dark, but there was still that hint of orange on the horizon. The lake was calm and quiet, not a single boat, and all the neighboring houses seemed to be vacant. We're truly the only ones around still. Our deck has a fire pit, so we lit that for extra light as well as heat because it was chilly. The four of us were playing a game of beer pong, when in the middle of it, Glenn grabbed his phone and lowered the music to his portable speaker. He and Steve turned around to look over the deck to the grass below. My dad and I went over to see what they were looking at. Glenn said he heard something below us, and he could see someone walk under the deck. The deck doesn't have a stairway leading down. You have to go inside and downstairs to get down there. So my dad and I went downstairs and out the back door under the deck. There was nobody there. My dad called out a bunch of times to confirm this, and we went back upstairs. The thing is, Steve swore by it as well that he also heard someone speaking from under the deck. Regardless, we cut the game of beer pong short and went inside, making sure to lock the door. My mom and dad were up in their loft bedroom, while I was in the living room playing PlayStation. That's when it started. Loud, aggressive bangs on the sliding door. Accompanied with the bangs was a man's shrieks and screams. Sounded like he was screaming for help. The curtain to the door was shut, so I couldn't see who it was, but apparently everyone in the house heard it, because my brothers and parents came rushing to the living room. My dad yanked the curtain open to find himself face to face with some red-in-the-face man banging his fist on the glass, begging to be let in. He was claiming he was hurt and needed help. My dad asked, "Where are you hurt?" He didn't answer that though. He just kept repeating, "Let me in, I'm hurt." My dad then yelled to get out of here before we'd call the cops. He yanked the blinds shut and told us all to shut and lock our windows if they were open. We all stayed in the living room together for a couple hours, just to be safe. We had a movie on in the background as we talked, but eventually, with no other uninvited visitors outside, we all split off into our respective rooms for the night. I was browsing YouTube videos in my bed when it happened. The crash of shattering glass so loud it made me jump out of my bed. My heart instantly started racing. I didn't know if I was the only one who heard it because I didn't hear my parents or brothers running out of their rooms. I picked up the phone and called my dad's cell. He picked up and whispered he heard it too, and to stay in my room and lock the door. I reminded him my door didn't have a lock. Of course, my room, while the biggest of my brothers, was the one room that didn't have a lock. He told me to hide in the closet and call my brothers while he called the cops. I heard footsteps outside my room in the living room area. I tiptoed to my closet and did my best to quietly open and close the door, but the damn hinges just had to squeak. I sat behind a big plastic bag and texted my brothers, who also heard the noise and each locked their doors. It was the most tense moment of my life in that closet. The bedroom door opened, and I could see through the strips in the closet door someone walk to my bed and sit at the edge of it. He then took off one of his shoes and started shaking it, as if to get something out of his shoe. He put his shoe back on, then his head actually turned to look at the closet door. I felt as though he was looking at me. There was just this silence for the longest time, until he finally spoke, saying, "I know you're in there. I'm sure your family already called the cops. I'm not sure what my next course of action should be." At that moment, I had to decide whether to stay in there or make a break for the door, and I chose the second option. I burst through the closet door screaming as some kind of adrenaline boost. I made it to the door, expecting him to lunge for me and grab me, but he didn't. I ran up to my parents' loft and banged on the door. My dad opened it and let me in. I waited with them until the cops entered through the freshly broken back door. Then we left the room to meet them. The man who was sitting on my bed was no longer in the house. We checked every closet, under every bed, every little crevice of the house. The cops recommended we tape a bunch of garbage bags over the door and shut the curtain, and also that we stay awake for the night. My dad stayed in the living room the whole night, and first thing in the morning, he ran to Home Depot to buy a glass pane to fix the door. We're still actively quarantining in this house a week later. I'll send updates if the man returns. I've been staying in my apartment in Jersey City during this coronavirus epidemic. My roommate has since gone home to Ohio to stay with her family during all of this, so I've been in the apartment alone. I've been mostly just watching new movies and shows. I try not to go out too much because my city is pretty bad right now. A couple days ago, I was running extremely low on food, so I had to make a mandatory grocery run. I went to the nearby Trader Joe's wearing a mask and gloves, which, including the insane line and limited stock, turned out to be a production. On my walk home in the dark, I realized the streets were even quieter than they were the last time I went shopping, just a week before. Suddenly, out from an alleyway, some guy wearing a mask and gloves approached me. He had a baby wrapped in a hoodie and small blanket in his hands. He seemed very sincere in asking me to let him take his son to my apartment real quick so he could change his diaper and feed him his food. He swore to me that he was clean, and that he really needed this favor for just 5 minutes. That it was an emergency. Hearing the baby's little cries, and the fact that this man even had a child with him and just seemed sincere, the soft part of me agreed. I led him to my apartment building. It was only a short walk from there. We walked up the 3 stories to my apartment, and I led him inside, asking him to close the door behind him. I cleared a spot on the living room table for him to change his child's diaper and whatever. When I turned around, the man was like pacing around, or more like snooping around, I guess. He went into my kitchen to do God knows what. I called over to him that I set up the table for him to use. He didn't answer. I started getting confused. I walked to the kitchen and saw him looking around suspiciously, and what else I saw confused me. The man was standing with what I thought was his child, held in only one hand. It took me a second to understand. It wasn't a child. It was just some baby doll wrapped up in a blanket. I'm assuming one of those realistic ones that make the crying and moaning noises. The man looked at me and pulled out a gun from his right pocket. That's where things went from 1 to 100 real quick. He looked at me with a gun aimed at me and said something along the lines of, "I'm gonna take what I want and you're gonna stay in my sight." Of course, I had to say okay with a gun aimed at my head. I wondered if it could be a BB gun with a tip painted black, but even if it was, I doubted I could overpower him. I couldn't risk it. The man pulled out a big black bag from his backpack and filled it with valuables, including my wallet, some of my roommate's jewelry, kitchen valuables, my brother's Xbox which he lent me, and my iPad. It was sickening to watch, but I was the most scared of him pulling the trigger of that gun. He filled his bag and threw the fake baby in it as well, then he left. I called the cops first thing. They came and helped me in contacting the building owner to see the CCTV footage from the halls. Of course, upon seeing the footage, it didn't help much. The man's face was covered by a mask, making it near impossible to even discover who he was. All I can do is urge everyone to be careful, not to trust anyone, and stay indoors until all of this is over. The past month, I've been quarantining in my apartment alone with minimal outside contact because of the virus. My apartment is the downstairs floor of a 2-family house. The upstairs occupant isn't the landlord, he's just another tenant. I'm actually decently acquainted with the guy. His name's Rico. To be honest, he's a bit odd though. Of course, I hadn't seen Rico because I've been quarantining. I do still have to wake up early in the morning though for work, which I report to on my laptop now. A week ago, Rico started making a lot of noise one night. Late night, actually. I was in bed. It was like past 12. I had to be up early. And all of a sudden, I just start hearing constant thumping noises coming from the upstairs level of the house. It sounded like Rico was stomping around in boots or something. I waited for it to hopefully end eventually, but it just kept going on and on and on. Over 20 minutes of the stomping. I was so frustrated that I got up to knock on his door outside. I knocked a few times loud enough for him to hear. He never answered. When I gave up and went back to my room, though, thankfully the noise had stopped. I wasn't sure if he heard my knocks and stopped because of that or what, but I didn't care much. I fell into a deep sleep for some time, till I awoke in my dark bedroom. The clock read 2:30 something. I didn't know what exactly woke me up at first. Then I realized it must have been the fact that the room was cold. And I realized my window on the opposite side of the room was open about a foot. I knew for a fact I did not do that. I got up and quietly shut it, looking around my room paranoid. I checked under my bed and in the closet. No one there. It's not like anyone could fit through that opening in the window, but someone actually went out of their way to open that, and that terrified me. I did a scope of the place with all the lights on, and I could confirm there was nobody hiding inside, so I went back to bed with one eye open. Then the noises upstairs started again, thumping and stomping. I couldn't take this anymore. It almost sounded like he was hitting the floor with a hammer or something. I went up to his door again and pounded on it, yelling his name as well. Once again, no answer. I went back inside and grabbed my phone and dug deep for Rico's number. I didn't have it saved. It was buried in my text conversations somewhere. When I found it, I called him. He didn't pick up the first time or the second, but on the third time, he picked up sounding confused and like he had just been woken up. I said in a rather annoyed tone that he needed to stop making the constant noises. He asked what I'm talking about, and I explained the thumping noises. Then he dropped the bomb and told me, "Jared, I'm not in my apartment. I went home to stay with my family a week ago. Call the cops." It suddenly made a lot more sense, and I realized the noises had stopped ever since I went back to the door. I hung up before saying another word and dialed 911, not wasting a second. As I was on the phone talking to the police operator, I heard it clicking at my bedroom window. Someone was outside trying to lift open the window, which I had just locked earlier. I screamed as I realized it, and then yelled at the operator to hurry with the police. She said they were on their way and asked me to describe the man, but I couldn't. It was too dark. He seemed to hear my conversation, I would guess, and walked away from the window. 4 police officers showed up. I led them to the upstairs apartment where the door was unlocked. I walked in behind the officers, and not much searching needed to be done. There was a man with long graying hair down to his shoulders who was sitting on the couch looking up at the ceiling, seemingly laughing. When the officers approached him to arrest him, the man focused in on me, still laughing. He started to point at me, and that's when I had to leave because I was too freaked out. I waited until the man was in one of the police cars before talking to the officers again. I locked Rico's door, and the cops just told me to keep a good eye on the place for the time being. Rico came back the following day to assess what was stolen. He has been staying upstairs since. This happened back at a magical, delicate age when I still believed in Santa Claus. It was Christmas Eve night, or technically Christmas at that point. The time, I have no idea. All I know is it was late and everyone in my house was probably asleep. I woke up randomly to what I don't know, but I was probably extremely thirsty. I had to get out of my bed and walk all the way downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. There were night lights on in the living room and kitchen, so I didn't have to turn on any lights to see where I was going. Whenever I was thirsty when I was a little kid, I'd always decide to finish the glass in the kitchen instead of bring it up to my room. I don't know why, just one of those stupid things I did as a kid. As I was sipping the water, I heard noises come from down in the den, where we had our Christmas tree. It sounded like a big bag. I peered my head around the wall leading down the stairway to the den, but it was a little too dark to see who could be down there. I actually thought maybe it was my mom, so I started walking down the stairs.
and the rustling of the bag stopped. I turned down the couch side lamp, and there I was, greeted with a massive man, both in height and size, wearing a red suit and hat and a familiar long white beard. It was Santa Claus. He waved me over, and I nervously but excitedly walked over to him. He patted my head and said he was just delivering my presents from his black bag. I looked at the bag, which seemed to be full of small boxes. I tried to get a peek in the bag, but he stopped me and said, No, don't do that. It's a surprise." I noticed there were already some presents under the tree. He turned me around and whispered in my ear I need to go back to bed. For some reason I didn't go. I just turned around and kept looking at Santa. Eventually he actually started walking me up the stairs, telling me we need to be quiet. He asked me which way my room was, and then he told me to go up the second flight of stairs. That was when I actually obeyed him. I looked down the stairs when I was at the top, and all I saw was the eerie figure of the Santa Claus looking up at me. I realized he turned off the nightlight as I was walking up the stairs. I went to my room and shut the door, excited that I just saw Santa. As I tried to fall back asleep, I heard a loud bang from downstairs in the den. The sound traveled all the way back up to my room. I assumed that was Santa leaving the house. The next morning, I woke up early to my mom's screams downstairs. I ran down to the den, where my mom and dad already were, to a disturbing and confusing scene for my young self. There were no presents under the tree, and the sliding window was broken. I don't mean the glass was shattered, I mean it was slammed shut so hard it got knocked off the sliding mechanism. I confusedly asked my parents what happened, and explained that I saw Santa last night. When I told them this, they frantically tried getting as much info out of me as possible. My dad called the police, and when I asked him about the story for fresh details before writing this, he said the 911 operator said on the line that 2 other calls for the same incident had come in that morning. Apparently a man dressed as Santa Claus was targeting certain houses with accessible windows, and he was stealing the gifts under their Christmas trees. I believe there's a special place in hell for that man. My parents had to tell me later that day that Santa isn't real, and that should anything like that ever happen again, not to trust it. I once worked as a night security guard for a brief, horrible part of my life. It was for many places, but for the longest time, a mall in Chicago, which I'll leave the name out so that the story can in no way get traced back to me. As the lone night security guard in a huge city mall, it was very relaxing and laid back. But of course, working graveyard hours was the worst, especially when I had to do it on Christmas Eve night. I did my regular pacing back and forth the wide halls of the mall, occasionally having a seat by the big center Christmas tree which would stay lit 24/7. After getting a coffee from the security lounge section, I stepped back into the hall and noticed all the way on the other side of the mall, a light was on in one of the stores. A light that wasn't on before, I swear it. No one was supposed to be in the mall besides me. I jogged over to the store and set my coffee down under a plant. It was a jewelry shop. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. So how could anyone be in there? The light in the store suddenly started flickering, so naturally I had to chalk it up as faulty wiring, false alarm. I knelt down to pick up my coffee again, and as I looked up, I saw someone's head behind the front counter of the store. Just their head, like they were hiding. But it happened so fast. One moment there was light, the next darkness, and when the light flicked back on again, the head was gone. I literally rubbed my eyes and shook my head, wondering was I seeing things. I took my master keyring off my belt and fiddled for the key to the store. I didn't know where the light switch was, and to be honest, I was way too freaked out to check behind that counter with nothing but a flashlight. I shut the door and relocked it and walked back to my post by the Christmas tree. I started chugging my coffee because I really thought I was losing it after seeing what I saw. The lights in that store all the ways down on the other side of the hall were still off, but I heard a click and then a bang echo down in my direction, followed by someone running across one side of the hall to the other, before disappearing in an intersecting exit hallway. I sprang up and almost spit out the remainder of my coffee. I ran down the hall till I came to the intersecting smaller hallway. This hallway, which led to one of the exits, had a bunch of massage chairs, coin-operated kiddie rides, and the public restrooms. I didn't see anywhere else that person could have gone besides the restroom, as the exit doors were all locked from both sides. I got to the door of the men's bathroom and stopped, once again faced with the fear of confronting whoever was in that mall with me. I cracked the door open just slightly, enough for me to start speaking into the bathroom, saying whoever's in here needs to get out before I call the cops. There was a crying and moaning type noise coming from inside the restroom. I opened the door fully and realized it was coming from one of the stalls. I repeated what I said at the door, but the crying sounds didn't stop. I knelt down in front of the stall to get a peek under, and I saw two black shoes facing the door, facing me. It seemed the person was just facing the stall door, making these crying noises. The crying stopped, and then the next thing I saw was the person on the other side of the stall quickly get on their knees and look under the door back at me. I recognized it as the same person from behind that counter in that store. I got back on my feet and left the bathroom to call the police and explain the situation. As a security guard, I never encountered anything like this overnight, and I did know how to deal with it. I definitely did not want to make it physical. A couple police officers came to the doors at the end of the hall, and I let them in. We all went to the men's bathroom again, and the stall door was still shut, and the man was still inside. For the longest time, the officers demanded he come out with his hands up. After a while of him refusing to listen, the male officer started kicking in the stall door until it broke open. The two officers apprehended the nutjob inside the stall. As they walked him out of the mall, though, the man had his head turned to look at me the entire time. I looked away. His dead eyes staring into my soul genuinely disturbed me. He looked like he wanted to kill me. Before he was put in the back of the police car, he said my name, and I immediately got the chills. The officers said they would find out who he is and everything, and they went on their way. My shift ended a few hours later, and for the remainder of my time working at that mall, I was always paranoid every time I'd turn a corner that he'd be standing there. Our parents had our youngest sibling much later than they had my brother and I. This happened last year when I was 18, my older brother was 24, and our youngest sibling Rachel was just 2. I was home from college for winter break. My older brother would be returning home from out of state in a few days, and my parents were on a couple's vacation. It was about a week before Christmas, and I was tasked with taking care of Rachel until my parents got back. My time watching Rachel consisted of a lot of sitting around the house, having friends over, and just watching TV and movies. I would let Rachel play in the living room with her toys as I'd watch TV with no lights on but the Christmas tree, which I always find to make watching TV a lot more relaxing. When Rachel started to get tired, I brought her up to her room, changed her, and put her in the crib upstairs. I made sure to turn on the baby monitor as my parents did every night just to make sure I could hear her if she got restless. Something to note, Rachel's room shares a bathroom with my mom and dad's room. So basically, both my parents' and Rachel's rooms are connected to a bathroom, which thus connects the 2 bedrooms in a sense. I went back downstairs to watch TV. I think I was watching The Grinch when sounds started coming from the baby monitor. Distorted, human-like noises. It didn't sound like Rachel, so I hurried back upstairs to Rachel's room. I burst in so quickly and aggressively that she immediately awoke and started crying. I looked around the room naturally. Then I picked Rachel up and started gently rocking her. But I realized this didn't help. She was probably too big for it. So I put her back down in the crib and started tickling her, then gently whispering her back to sleep. When she had her eyes closed again, I left the room. A few minutes later, I heard Rachel crying again through the baby monitor. I ran up to see what's wrong, and she was standing in her crib, pointing at the bathroom door, which was cracked open. I honestly didn't remember if it had been cracked open like that earlier or not. I went to check the bathroom, and it was clear.
I told her calmly she's imagining things. I wasn't sure how much she understood of what I was saying, but after a few minutes in there with her, I got her to settle back down. Once again, I went down to the living room to continue watching TV. The orange light on the baby monitor once again started going off. I felt like I was in a horror movie scenario. I could distinctly hear a man's whispering coming from the baby monitor. I ran back up to that room faster than ever, burst through the door to Rachel's crying again. I went to pick her up to get her out of there, and when I turned for the door, I looked into the dark bathroom, which now had the door wide open. There was a man in my parents' room, and he started walking through the bathroom towards me and Rachel. I ran out of the house to the neighbor's house while holding Rachel. Our neighbor Judy let us in and let me use her phone to call the cops. They didn't find anyone, but Judy let us stay the night at her place regardless. The next morning, Judy went back to my house with me to look around as support. The house seemed clear. However, I couldn't help but look around the house to try and find out how he got in, but I just couldn't, and it made no sense. A couple weeks later, my mom sent me to the attic to put some of the Christmas decorations away, and you wouldn't believe what I found up there. In the corner of the attic was a bed of blankets and a pillow, hidden behind a bunch of ripped up boxes stacked up as a wall. I immediately associated it to that man in our house. We have no idea how long that man was actually in our house for.
I am 14 and my friend is 15. One night my friend asked me if I wanted to spend the night, so I did. His mom was at work and his dad was at the gym. Me and my friend were upstairs in his room playing video games. We kept hearing what sounded like scratching noises and slight banging. We thought nothing of it because he has a dog, so we kept playing our video game. Minutes later we heard the noises again, but they were louder, and so we went to go see if it was the dog. It couldn't be the dog because it was lying outside his parents' room. Fearing someone was trying to break in, we grabbed our knives and flashlights. We searched all the rooms upstairs, then went downstairs, searching it with only our flashlights. We decided it would be best to search his backyard, although we don't know how someone would get in his backyard because it's fenced in and there's a deep drop-off on the other side of the fence at the back. The search came up empty. I convinced my friend we should search the front of his house and make our way around his fence. We went around front and he went left and I went right. On the right his fence connects to his neighbor's, so I went over to him to find him frozen with his light shined in the direction of the woods near the drop-off. I was weirded out and shined my light in the direction of his to find a guy dressed from head to toe in all black, frozen and staring at us. At this moment, I yelled run and we bolted inside the house and called 911. We waited and minutes later 2 officers arrived to find nothing and they told us to call them again if anything happens. Me and my friend were instructed by his parents to stay inside and downstairs in case anything happens, so we did. About an hour later, me and him were sitting downstairs on the couch and he out of nowhere asked, "Did you see that?" "See what?" He then said, "The light. Someone shined a light through the window over the fence." About a second after he said that, I saw a beam of light shine through the window. So we called 911 once again, and the officers showed up minutes later and yet again found nothing. Me and my friend at this point were paranoid and waited until his dad showed up and we took him outside to the backyard where we all heard footsteps. His dad convinced us that it was just a hunter, so we went to bed with no more problems. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. My friend asked me about 2 weeks later if I wanted to spend the night again, and I did. Later that night, his parents were both still at work. We were joking around about what had happened with what we thought was the hunter as his dog was outside doing its business. While we were talking, I peeked out the back door to check on his dog to find what looked to be someone peeking over the fence, so we immediately called his dog in and locked the door. We left it alone, and minutes later, as we were in his room, we heard noises. So I looked out his window to once again see what looked like a guy peeking over the fence. So we grabbed knives and flashlights once again and went in the backyard and shined the flashlight in the direction we thought we saw the person. The light illuminated the outline of a head at the area of the fence we thought we saw the guy. We ran inside and called 911 and they responded. Minutes later they showed up and again found nothing and sat at the area outside the fence near the woods for 5 minutes in case something happened. Nothing happened, so they left and they told us to call back if anything happened. We didn't tell his parents this time because we thought they wouldn't believe us. Me and my friend returned upstairs to his room, and about 2 hours later, we heard the loudest banging ever. It started from the downstairs on the left side and went to the front door. We freaked out, we grabbed the dog and barricaded ourselves in his parents' room and got his dad's gun out in case we needed it. We then called 911, and again the police showed up and found no one and no sign of anyone and left. That was the last time we ever had that problem, and it still has us scared to this day. I was 14 years old, hanging out with my friend Jesse, who was also 14. We were in the living room playing Call of Duty. His parents weren't home for the night, so we were being as loud as we wanted. We were doing nothing but playing video games and eating junk food all night. And eventually, since his parents weren't home, he convinced me to just stay over for the night. So after Jesse went upstairs to go to the bathroom, I went downstairs to call my mom in private and tell her I would be staying over. By the time I got back upstairs, Jesse was back, and he just stared at me with a confused look on his face. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he thought that I was upstairs as he thought he heard someone in the bedroom next to the bathroom. I assured him I was downstairs making a phone call, and he just looked back upstairs with a concerned look. He walked upstairs and I followed him. He stopped at the door to the bedroom and put his ear up against it. He then opened the door and peeked into the room. It was dark, but I could see there was enough light in there to be able to scan the room. We didn't see anything, so he shut the door. I told him he was being paranoid as we went back downstairs to play more video games. We turned the volume back up loud and resumed playing. After the match ended, the loading screen came up, along with the silence that usually accompanies loading screens. That's when me and Jesse both looked at each other. Jesse hit the mute button as we listened to what we were sure was somebody grunting from upstairs in that bedroom. But soon after the silence from the television, there was silence from upstairs as well. Jesse whispered to me that someone is hiding up there. They must have stopped making the noise as soon as there was silence down here. Jesse whispered to me that we need to leave through the back door right now as it was much quieter than the front door. I agreed, and we headed outside to the back door. As soon as we were outside, Jesse got on the phone with the police as I looked up to the bedroom window. For some stupid reason, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and aimed it up to the window. About 3 seconds later, my heart dropped as someone stepped into view from behind the glass, but only for a brief moment. They seemed to crouch down under the window after spotting us. Jesse saw it too. That's when we actually took off down the block. We only came back when we saw a police car parked outside with its lights on. Jesse unlocked the front door for the 2 cops and they went inside to investigate. As me and Jesse were outside waiting by the car, we saw him. Him, as in the guy who was surely at the window. He was coming out from the backyard, walking really fast, yet also clearly trying to keep quiet. This man was really tall, like 6'5" or something, and he looked to be mid-40s. Me and Jesse ran inside and screamed for the cops to come outside, but by that time he was gone, and we had no idea which direction he could have gone in. Inside of the bedroom that the man was in, a giant clothes bag had been pulled out from under the bed with certain articles of clothing obviously missing. There was also money missing from the desk drawer, and the desktop computer had been turned on. We never saw or heard of this man again. This took place in the summer of 2008 when I was 12 years old. I was sleeping over at my friend Calvin's house. I can't remember every little detail about what was going on, but I remember Calvin's family came home unexpectedly early, and things were getting a bit hectic in the house, so we came up with this cute little idea of pitching a tent up in the backyard and sleeping out there for fun. We figured why not since it was warm out anyway. We pitched the tent in like 15 minutes with Calvin's backyard nightlight giving us enough light in the dark. Now on one side of Calvin's backyard beyond the fence was about 100 yards of nothing but trees. We lived in the country in New Jersey. Anyway, after goofing around for a while, Calvin turned off the nightlight and we finally went to sleep. Now, I don't know about everyone else, but I cannot for the life of me fall asleep in sleeping bags, or let alone anything but my bed. I was twisting and turning for like 3 hours trying to fall asleep in that thing. Sometime during the night, I started to hear a little rattly, creaky type sound coming from around the fence. It gave me chills at first, naturally. I wanted to wake Calvin up, but I didn't. It sounded like the wooden fence was being pushed or was just moving. It was a bit windy out after all, but still, nevertheless, being the only one awake outside in a pretty rural area, and hearing a weird sound would make anyone uneasy. I tried to ignore it for the longest time, rolling around for like 3 hours hearing nothing but the sound of the wind, to then hearing a constant strange sound was just too weird, and I was getting downright freaked out. I felt the urge to pee coming on, and I didn't really want to go out there without knowing Calvin was awake. So I woke him up and told him to listen to that noise. Of course, he thought it was just the wind, but as long as he was awake, I did feel better about leaving the tent. I unzipped the tent and naturally looked in the direction of the noise. I couldn't really see anything, it was too dark, so I walked over and flicked on the nightlight switch. When I looked at the fence, I saw there was a person leaning on the fence with his head down, seemingly pushing the fence. I immediately turned the light off and practically dove into the tent. I whispered to Calvin what I saw, and as we both fell silent, we realized that the noise had stopped. I told Calvin to call his house phone as quietly as possible, but he said we should run straight for the back door. I agreed. He unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and opened the little door, and when he ran out of the tent, he screamed. In reaction, I jumped out from the tent and ran straight for the back door as well, not looking behind me. When I asked Calvin why he screamed like that, his response scared me. He told me he saw somebody standing right by the side of the tent in arm's reach. The rest of the night we slept in Calvin's room upstairs, and I could swear, with the window open, I could still hear the creaky fence being pushed, but every time I looked, I couldn't see anyone out there.
I bought my first house that I currently still live in 2 years ago. I was in the unpacking and settling in phase. At the time, I was single and living alone, but I just figured it was time for a house. I had a couple friends over to help me unload the truck full of boxes, and I paid them with food since they wouldn't accept money. They hung around for a few hours after just to hang out. When my friend Dale went to the bathroom, he came back and said he heard some noises from inside the walls, and that it sounded like there were some pipe issues. I took note of it, and the two of them left a little later. Since it was a Saturday, I stayed up pretty late on my laptop watching Netflix. However, I was hearing some light thumping sounds from above me, which was odd because my bedroom is upstairs. The only thing that could be above me would be the attic. Then I remembered Dale's comment about the noises from inside the walls. I went to the attic door and pulled it down, and I actually had to take a deep breath because I was a bit nervous. I climbed the stairs into the attic and pulled the light switch down. One very dim yellow light buzzed on, just barely lighting up the attic. The noises in the walls stopped though. Either that or the noises just weren't coming from the attic, I imagined. With no boxes up there yet, it was just basically a big empty space, and I could clearly see no one was up there. The only things in the entire attic were a couple giant framed paintings leaning on one of the walls. I went back down to my room and tried to get some sleep, but I heard the noises again. Now I started to fear there was a small animal on the walls, like a raccoon. The sound still seemed to be coming from directly above my room. It had to be in the attic. So once more, I went up into the attic and looked to where I thought would be directly above my bedroom. The thing is, the attic didn't seem to extend the entire length of the house, so there's a wall covering where the section above my room should be. I walked over to the wall just to listen for potential noises, and I did hear noises from the other side of this wall. Then I looked at the two paintings leaning on the wall, how they were slightly angled. My heart started to race. I walked to the paintings and slightly angled one upwards off the wall, revealing a big hole in the wall. It took a few seconds for the reality to sink in. As I held the painting at an upright position, the painting was suddenly pushed out of my grip to fall flat on the floor. I nearly had a heart attack. Out from the hole came this sickly-looking girl. She seemed to be high on something. She was shaking, making weird noises, and she would start this creepy laughing. She grabbed onto me and dug her nails into my shoulders so hard I screamed, and I pushed her as hard as I could off of me. She fell backwards into the secret room, and I ran to the exit and shut the attic door behind me. I locked myself in my room as I called the police and reported that a crazy, dangerous person was in my attic. Cops arrived within 5 minutes. 3 cop cars ended up pulling up, and there were a total of 5 police officers in my house. 4 of them went into the attic, and I heard the struggle. The girl screamed like a creature, and it sounded like she was trying to attack the officers, which led to her getting tased. They finally managed to get her in cuffs and carry her out of the attic and outside to one of the cars. The girl had to be like anywhere from 25 to 35 years old, but like I said, she looked sickly. While the officers were still in the house, I went into the attic to examine the secret room. Inside was a pile of blankets, a dirty pillow, a lot of food wrappers, and human waste in one corner. It seemed as though this girl had been up there for a long time. It was truly a nightmare to discover this on my first night in my new house. The girl was taken to a nearby psychiatric center to get her the help she needed. My dad helped me buy my first house when I was 28. I was never spoiled, but my dad always had a lot of money, and when I wanted a house, he lent me a large amount of cash. The previous owners of the house were an elderly couple. As far as I know, the husband died many years before I moved in. The wife died just a few weeks before I bought the house. The son of the couple who sold me the house kept a lot of the furniture in the house for me, and he took only what he really needed or wanted, which made things easier for me, less furniture to buy. I did dump some of the more outdated stuff on the curb though, including this old rocking chair that was sitting in the living room. A lot of the furniture just had an older, creepy vibe that I didn't want in the house. The next day, I was cleaning out more junk in the upstairs section of the house for most of the day. A lot of it was heavy lifting, so I'd take breaks in between, and this ate up most of the day. I didn't really get an ounce of sleep the night before, as I have a mild form of insomnia which affects me certain nights. That second night, having moved into the house, I went out to get some Chinese for dinner because I had no energy to cook. When I got back, I was disturbed to find the front door was unlocked. Now, I truly don't remember if I had simply forgotten to lock it or not. I wanted to believe I forgot, but it just seemed so unlikely I'd forget to do that, especially with my brand new house. I started flicking on every light of every room on the main floor. The more light, the safer I'd feel. I then proceeded up the stairs to do the same there, in the common area and in all 3 bedrooms. There was also a basement to the house that I'd only been down inside once at that point. It was not a big basement like you would expect though. It was kind of just a small storage space where the washer and dryer happened to be. I was already feeling a lot more confident that I had just simply forgotten to lock the door, but I still had to check the basement before I could confirm this. I opened the basement door and I flicked on the light. As I got halfway down the stairs, I saw an old rocking chair sitting in the middle of the basement. I didn't remember it being there the first time I saw the basement, and when I stood over it, I could swear it was the same rocking chair I had thrown away the night before. If not the same one, at least an identical one. I looked around the basement though, and there wasn't anyone down there, so I did calm down just a bit. I headed back upstairs to eat my Chinese food. I remember leaving the basement door cracked open though, which sat right next to the kitchen, and I started hearing rickety, creaking sounds from downstairs. I ran to the basement door and I tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't turn on this time. All I could think was, what the hell was that noise? I went to the kitchen to grab my flashlight from under the sink. and I went a quarter of the way down the stairs with the flashlight beaming down to the bottom, and I saw the rocking chair moving, and someone was sitting in it. It was an old woman with gray curly hair, glasses, and she was dressed in a pink nightgown. Her head slowly turned to be looking up at me. I gasped and left the basement, closing the door this time. I don't know what I was immediately thinking at that point. All I knew was I had to call the police. But when they came, they searched the whole basement with me, and we didn't find anyone. There were also no hidden compartments or exits down there where she could have escaped through. At a certain point, the cops started looking at me like I was crazy. I knew it, and pretty soon they left. I had the contact details of the son of the couple who owned the house before me, so I called him up around 8 or 9 p.m. and described the lady to the best of my ability. He sounded shook and started to cry over the phone, and said I just perfectly described his mother and her favorite nightgown. He said he'd be right over. He got to the house within the hour, and we went downstairs together. He seemed to be in shock the whole time. I could see his hands shaking. He ended up leaving with the rocking chair after a while of talking with me and being very emotional. It may have been emotional for him, but it was the scariest thing I could have possibly ever witnessed with my own eyes. It still stands to be. I kept the basement door locked 24/7 after that, and I'd be scared to do laundry for months. But after half a year of nothing happening, it wasn't that bad. I only lived in that house a year and a half, though. When I was 12 years old, my family moved to a new house in the countryside of Louisiana, located near a small village. We'd always lived in rural areas, definitely grew up unfamiliar to the city lifestyle or anything even remotely close to that. The property was 3 acres and very private. On the second night at that house, our dog Parker, who would sleep in my room, started barking and growling in the middle of the night. When he saw that I sat up in my bed, his tail started wagging, but he'd continue to bark and growl. I couldn't tell what he was looking at though. He was just looking towards the corner of the room. I checked the closet and nothing. So I told Parker to shut up, and he did. But I did keep hearing him lift his head off his bed every once in a while, reacting to something. The next day, an older man came and knocked on the front door. My dad answered while I was in the living room watching cartoons. I heard the whole interaction. The old man introduced himself as Gene, the next door neighbor. My dad told me to come over and introduce myself, so I did. Gene seemed very kooky and aloof. Even my 12-year-old self could realize that. But he seemed nice, I guess. The next day, I was in the backyard playing Pokemon on my Game Boy. My dad was in the front of the house mowing. The rest of my family wasn't home. Oddly enough, over walks Gene wearing a farmer's hat and overalls, talking to me in his thick southern accent, asking what I was up to. He actually sat down at the table with me, which made me uncomfortable, especially considering he just walked into our backyard. Albeit there was no fence separating the front and backyard, but still. I told him I was playing Pokemon, and he knew what it was, immediately making Pikachu noises trying to be funny, but it was just unsettling. I started to realize there really was something off about this guy. My dad came to the backyard with a lawnmower, then turned it off when he saw Gene sitting next to me. He approached us and said hello with a smile, but I could tell based on my dad's face and tone that he was slightly confused what he was doing in our backyard. He never asked him that, but my dad told me I needed to go inside and wash the dishes. I knew he was trying to get me away from him. A few minutes later, my dad came in and asked me if Gene just walked into our yard, and I said yeah. That's when he told me he didn't want me around that guy anymore, and to let him know if I saw him again. It wasn't until a few nights later that I woke up to Parker growling and barking again. This time he was looking at the window. I got up to open the window just to hear if something was going on out there. Quickly after opening the window, without seeing anybody out there, I heard Gene imitating Pikachu noises again, in his creepy old man's voice. I ran out of my room screaming "Dad" repeatedly. When I told my dad Gene was outside my window, he stormed outside to check. But when he couldn't find him on the property, he went to Gene's house next door. But here's the twist. That Gene guy didn't live next door. An older woman answered the door and had no idea who he was. So my dad went to every single neighboring house, and nobody had ever heard of a Gene. My dad called the police to report the man. Police said they would be on the lookout for him, and it even made the news. We never again saw or heard from Gene, or whatever his real name was.
This happened in the summer, and I believe I was about 12 at the time. I was staying in a hotel in a fairly large city with my mom and my younger brother. We were visiting other extended family, but chose not to stay in their house. My brother is younger than me by a decent amount, so I was usually told to keep an eye on him. On the day we arrived, my mom told me to do just that while she checked us in and received our room card. So, my brother and I sat down on a couch in the lobby and relaxed a little bit. While we were sitting, a man in about his mid-40s walked into the hotel. The couch was facing the hotel doors, so I got a good look at him. I remember that he was very average looking. Describing his features in detail could generate several different images. The guy comes in and sits on the couch opposite ours. I didn't think anything of it until I realized that he didn't go up to the counter first. He just came in and sat down. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. Maybe I was being a bit paranoid, but I thought he might have followed us in. Thankfully, my mom called us over and told us that our room was ready. We left the lobby and went to our room. Shortly afterwards, we left the hotel to go meet family. I forgot about the man for the rest of the day. We returned at about 7, and my mom told us that we could go swimming in the hotel pool. We all went to our room, changed, and went to the pool. A few minutes after we got into the water, the same man from before walked in and sat down. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, so he definitely wasn't going swimming. Again, we didn't think much of it until I could see that my mom was visibly worried. She pointed him out to me, and she said that if he didn't leave within 5 minutes, we needed to go back to our rooms. 5 minutes passed and he was still there, so we got our things and left. By then, it was close to 8 o'clock. We had brought a rented movie to watch, so we planned to watch that and go straight to bed. I noticed that my mom was a little on edge because of the man who had been watching us, and I got a little more worried myself too. Halfway through the movie, my mom got up to get into the shower. While she was in there, someone knocked on the door and said, "Housekeeping." I thought it was weird that the cleaning staff would come this late, but we needed another towel, so I answered the door. I wish I hadn't been so stupid. It was the same creepy man. He gave me a smile and a little wave. I just stood there, kind of motionless. My mind automatically went to the worst possible situation: kidnapping, rape, torture, etc. I heard the water in the shower turn off. He stood there as well for a moment, and then he spoke. "How was your swim?" At that moment, my mom came out of the shower, saw the man at the door, pulled me back, and slammed the door. She locked it. Then she called the front desk from our hotel phone to report the guy. I told her to just call the police, but she didn't listen. She then requested we switch rooms. I then heard footsteps stomping down the hallway away from our room. Thankfully, the guy had left. After that, we switched hotel rooms and didn't see the guy again during our stay. Have you ever gotten an uneasy feeling staying in a hotel room, especially by yourself? Likely not, and I also doubt you've ever been in a hotel room by yourself. But when I was a kid, I always got scared sleeping in hotel rooms. I would always keep looking back at the dark corners of the room every 20 seconds, thinking there would be somebody standing there. My fear not only drove me crazy, it drove my parents crazy, as I would always insist that I would sleep between them until I was around 9 or 10 years old. Anyway, eventually I had to grow up, or at least give off the impression, and started sleeping in my own bed or sharing the bed with my sister. Now I'm 24 years old, living on my own, and have to take a lot of business-related trips for my job. On one particular out-of-town trip, I was staying at a Comfort Inn in North Carolina, with all the expenses paid by my job, of course. I was in the area for a meeting with an office in a different town, and the inn was my home for the night. It was across the street from some big car dealership. That's all I remember about the surroundings. Anyway, I was off the next day, so I could look forward to just relaxing in the hotel and watching a couple movies. I was ironically watching the first Saw movie, and I swear, during the scene where Adam was hearing sounds in his apartment, my childhood paranoia started to come back for a bit, as I thought I heard little crackling type noises coming from inside the closet. Being 24, I told myself that I had to get over this nonsensical childish fear. I simply raised the volume on the movie and tried to ignore it. At the same time, I popped 2 sleeping pills into my mouth so that I'd be wiped out by the time the movie was over. Eventually, I flipped off the TV and rolled over onto my side to finally get some shut-eye. That was when the crackling noises became apparent again. It wasn't constant or anything. It was just like once every minute or so I'd hear this crackling type noise that I just can't describe coming from the closet. It wasn't happening too frequently to really bother me, and the sleeping pills were knocking me out at that point, so I was out within like 10 minutes. The next thing I remember, I awoke to the sound of cloth being rustled around. I sprang to an upright position, but it was literally too dark to even see within a few feet in front of me. After I flipped on the bedside light, there I saw somebody dressed in all black with a hood over his head, probably 6'5", 250 pounds, rummaging through my bag. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and in response, he fled the room. He had stolen my wallet and my watch, but he had also created a lasting memory that only digs deeper into a very large childhood fear of mine. I have never heard a story about anything like this on the news or anything, so for something like this to happen to a person like me, somebody who had such an odd, specific fear as a child, was simply catastrophic to me. When I was 17, I started to develop some beef with my dad, who's a huge hothead. Tensions would grow worse through the years, and it got to the point that I would commonly have to leave for the night after getting into huge fights with my dad about personal things that I won't talk about. Sometimes I would stay at a friend's house or check into a hotel. It was May 9th, 2015. I was 21 years old, and after another huge scene back at home with my dad, I had to get out of there for my own good. I checked into a nearby hotel, the Quality Inn and Suites. It was literally half a mile from my house. I'd be throwing away a little less than $100 for it, but I had nowhere else to go. It was early this time around. Usually these outbursts happen around nighttime. It was like 4 o'clock, so I decided to just hang out by the outdoor pool and clear my head. It was funny, I was the only one around in this hotel. The pool was empty, the hallways were empty, even the lobby was empty, except for, of course, the desk worker. Then again, it was only May, and it wasn't like we lived in some huge vacation destination of a town. My room was in the middle of the hall on the 2nd floor. I had no idea why they'd given me that room, since it seemed like I was one of the only few people staying in the hotel. I hung out in my room after the pool for a bit. That's when there was a very light tapping on the door. I waited for someone to yell housekeeping, but they never did. Therefore, I ignored it. And to my surprise, even though I had the do not disturb sign on the door handle, I heard the beep of the lock on the door, and then I heard the door slowly opening. I called out, no thank you, not right now. I couldn't see the employee at the door because there was a wall that blocked the view of the door from the bed. There was a pause, and I repeated myself, growing a bit curious. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. It actually startled me. I got up to actually go follow them and tell them that that was rude. When I stepped into the hall, I looked to my right. Nobody. I looked to my left, and at the end of the hall, I saw the right leg of a woman turning the left corner further down the hall before disappearing. How did she get there so fast, I wondered. I ran down to the end of the hall, and that's when I heard another door closing. When I turned the corner, nobody. just maybe 20 closed, unoccupied hotel doors. I was so confused and honestly a bit freaked out. I went down to the front desk to complain about the rude employee. The woman at the counter said that must be Rosa. She said she would question her about slamming the door later on. I thanked the woman and then went out to eat at the nearby TGI Fridays down the road. When I got back to the room, I was on the phone talking to my mom, who said that I shouldn't come back because my dad was still super pissed. I entered my room and told her how depressed I was with all this fighting bullshit, and she understood. When I hung up, it was only 8 o'clock. I wanted the night to be over. I brushed my teeth, watched a little TV, and went to sleep at around 9 o'clock. I awoke to a noise. At first, I didn't know what it was. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and listened.
You have to let them in.
There was somebody standing at the left edge of my bed, towering over me. I screamed and felt like throwing up at the same time. It was a dreadful, horrifying feeling. The person then grabbed around my throat and started repeating the words, "You piece of shit." It was an older woman with a weak grip. I was able to escape easily. I ran to the door of the room. I heard her following me, but she stopped at the door when I ran down the halls to the front desk. The woman at the front desk admitted that one of the employees had lost one of her master keys that had access to all of the rooms in the hotel, something they were obligated to report to the head of the hotel. I was furious. Of course, I got a refund, gave some info to the cops, and then went home that night, where my dad actually showed something close to sympathy after I explained what happened. Ever since, I've actually never had to leave the house for the night, and I hope it stays that way. Oh yeah, and I have absolutely no idea whatever became of that crazy nutcase woman that tried to kill me.
This is one of those stories I've been sitting on for a really long time. It happened back when I was maybe 25 or 26, way before I met my wife and way before we had kids. I was a completely different person back then. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that I had the kind of free time and risk tolerance that I genuinely can't relate to anymore. I used to do these solo backpacking trips a few times a year, usually somewhere in the Appalachians. I'd drive out to some remote trailhead, hike deep into the backcountry, way off the trail, and spend a few days completely off the grid. No cell service, no other people, nothing. I loved it. My friends thought I was insane, and honestly, I kind of was. This particular trip was in the Cherokee National Forest, and it changed how I see backpacking forever. I had been out there for 2 days, and everything had been going perfectly. The weather had been great, the trail was quiet, and I hadn't seen another person since the first morning. That changed pretty quickly though. On the afternoon of the second day, I noticed dark storm clouds building up to the west. I wasn't too worried at first. I'd hiked through rain plenty of times and it was never a big deal. But within about an hour, I realized it wasn't going to be a passing shower. The wind picked up hard and the temperature dropped fast enough that I actually stopped to put on another layer. By the time the rain started, I was already looking for a spot to hunker down. The problem was that I was in a pretty exposed section of the trail. As I predicted, it wasn't a light rain. It went from windy to full-on downpour in minutes. The wind was bending smaller trees sideways, and I could hear branches cracking and falling in the canopy above me. I started getting genuinely concerned about my safety. Lightning was striking pretty close by, and I was hiking at elevation with a metal-framed pack on my back. Not ideal. I kept pushing forward, completely soaked at that point. I was scanning the woods on either side of the trail for anything that could pass as shelter. As if by some miracle, I actually saw a structure through the trees off to my left. It was small and dark and partially hidden by the forest, but it was unmistakably man-made. As I got closer, I realized it was a tiny, one-story cabin. They looked extremely old, like it could have been a hunting cabin or a homesteader's shelter from decades ago. There was a single window on the side I was approaching. I can't overstate how relieved I was. I practically sprinted over to the thing and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dim but dry. There wasn't much in there, just a chair, a small table, and what looked like a cot frame pushed against the far wall. There was a stone fireplace on the right side that was clogged with old ash and debris. The place honestly smelled really bad, but I didn't care about anything other than stripping out of my soaked clothes and laying down. There wasn't a couch or anything in there, so I literally just picked a spot on the floor and lied down. I was in survival mode at that point, not exploration mode. All I cared about was that I was out of the storm. It wasn't until I'd been inside for maybe 10 or 15 minutes that I started actually looking around. With the storm raging outside, there wasn't much else to do besides flick on a flashlight and snoop, so that's exactly what I did. There was more stuff in that cabin than I had initially realized. For starters, there was a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner near the cot frame. It didn't look ancient like the rest of the place, which confused me. There were also a couple of cans and water jugs on the table, which made me think someone had been using the place as a base camp of sorts. Maybe another backpacker or a hunter. It wasn't unusual to find stuff like that in remote cabins, but the more I looked around, the more things started bothering me. There were marks on the wall near the door. At first I thought they were just damage from age or weather, but when I got closer to inspect them, I could see they were scratches. There were dozens of them, some shallow and some deeper. There was no pattern or order to the marks, at least not one I could see. I stepped back and looked at the door itself. The handle was a simple latch, which wasn't unusual. Despite the storm, I opened the door just to get a look at the mechanism. There was a metal bracket on the outside of the frame, which looked like it was designed to hold a padlock. The bracket was on the outside. There was no corresponding latch on the inside. That meant the door could only be locked from the outside. Things only got stranger. I shut the door and started looking around the cabin. The only thing I hadn't checked out yet was the window, so I walked over to it. The glass was still perfectly intact, which surprised me given the apparent age of the place. But then I noticed why. There were screws drilled into the window frame, one in each corner securing it shut. Those had also been driven in from outside, and around the edges of the frame on the inside, there were more scratches, deep ones. These were unmistakable. They honestly looked like someone had tried to pry the window open with their bare hands. All of it hit me at once. Someone had been kept in this cabin, trapped, as in kept against their will. I should have left right then, and I did consider that, but there was a good part of me that felt like whatever had gone on in that cabin was well in the past. Everything in the cabin looked really old. Even the sleeping bag, which did look on the newer side, admittedly, was rigid and dusty. Plus, the last thing I wanted to do was go back out in that storm again, so I stayed. I'm not sure how much time passed, maybe an hour, maybe more. The storm wasn't letting up at all. If anything, it had gotten worse. The rain on the roof was so loud that it was hard to hear much of anything else. That's probably why it took me so long to notice the other sound. I picked up on the scratching or scraping noises from outside, somewhere along the left wall of the cabin. At first, I thought it was a branch, but I couldn't remember if there had been branches low enough to even touch the exterior of the cabin. As I was thinking about it, I heard two heavy thumps on the porch. They honestly didn't sound like storm sounds. This time I stood up. I did that thing where you freeze in place and try to focus by staring at a random spot on the wall. I was trying to listen, but if someone was moving out there, it would have been impossible to hear over the storm. I started getting paranoid that those sounds I heard were just a few of many, and that the rest had been drowned out by the rain. My eyes drifted over to the window. I couldn't bring myself to look through it. If someone really was out there, they'd probably be looking through it. I stayed in that position for what felt like forever. After a while, I started to relax a bit, thinking I had just been hearing the storm, or at the very worst, an animal poking around the cabin. I was almost ready to forget about everything when I heard something that sent me over the edge. Pressure on the door, like someone was leaning their full weight against it from the other side. The wood creaked and the latch rattled once before the pressure released. My heart rate instantly shot back up, and that's when something clicked. Why would someone be outside in a storm like this, circling the cabin, tapping on the walls, without just coming in? The door wasn't locked, nothing was stopping them, and then I thought about what I'd found inside the cabin, and it occurred to me that maybe whoever was out there didn't want to come inside. Maybe they wanted me to stay inside. Maybe the whole point was to keep me in there. I don't know if that was the right conclusion or if my mind was just spiraling, but I decided I was leaving right then. I didn't care about the storm. I started moving things into my backpack as fast as I could. I had this sickening feeling that something really bad was about to happen, and I was right. The next few moments were a blur. I was maybe 30 seconds from walking out the door when I heard the sound of glass shattering behind me. I spun around just in time to see something come through the window, and that was all I could see before the whole room erupted in flames. The flames spread so fast that I couldn't even process what was happening. One second I was standing in a dark room, and the next second the walls were on fire. The heat hit me like a physical wall, and the door wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the outside. I slammed into it with all my might, and it gave. It collapsed off its hinges, and me with it. I scrambled to get back on my feet, and I just ran. I couldn't even see. I was just running wildly through the woods and rain, trying to put as much distance between myself and that cabin. But before I could get a safe distance away, I felt something tackle me from behind, and I was back on the ground. There was a person on top of me, and suddenly I was fighting for my life. I clawed and kicked and screamed, but this guy wouldn't get off me. He was yelling too, and he kept trying to get me in a chokehold. He was gouging at my eyes and pulling my hair, and I started to feel dizzy, but I managed to push him off. I got back up and kept running, and whoever had just tried to kill me was screaming like a maniac. I looked back twice. I couldn't see my attacker, but I did see the cabin, which was fully engulfed in flames. I think the picture of that fireball is burned into my brain forever. The second time I looked back, the glow was smaller but still visible through the woods, but I just kept running. For all I knew, I was being chased. I didn't stop until my legs gave out. I found a spot where a couple of large trees had fallen against each other, and there was a narrow gap underneath that blocked most of the rain. I crawled under there and just collapsed. I couldn't feel my body. I don't know if it was the fire, the rain, or the attack. Maybe all three, but I was completely numb. All I did was sit in that crouched position and try to keep breathing. I don't know how many hours passed under those trees, but time lost all meaning. Eventually, I felt some feelings start to re-enter my body, and I told myself it was move or die. Whoever was out there was probably looking for me, and he couldn't have been that far away. So I got up and started moving through the woods. I didn't know where the trail was, but I didn't really care. I honestly can't tell you how I survived that night, but I did. I stumbled onto a random trail and just followed it. I was soaked and probably bleeding from multiple places, but I just kept trudging on. Eventually, the rain subsided a bit, at least enough for me to figure out where I was. I made it to some random trailhead, and by that point, the storm had passed. I don't remember too much after that. All I remember is that the first person I saw drove me to a hospital. I had second-degree burns on my left forearm and the back of my neck, and doctors told me I was lucky I hadn't inhaled more smoke than I did. None of it was permanent, but it hurt like hell for a long time afterwards. By the time I was healed and safe at home, I told myself I would never camp or hike alone again. Someone had intentionally set that cabin on fire to kill me. That's the only thing that makes any sense. It was pouring rain, a full-blown thunderstorm, and the roof was metal. There's no way a wooden structure goes up like that fast unless the wood had been treated with something beforehand. I gave the police everything, or as much as I could, but I could tell they weren't really going to do anything. And to be fair, I wasn't in a charted part of the woods, so it would have been silly to hound them. The only thing I don't understand is the timing of everything. My wife would probably tell you I stopped doing solo trips because I grew up and got more responsible, and she's not entirely wrong, but I honestly never told her about this incident, and I know I'll never go backcountry trekking again alone. My name is James. This happened maybe 7 or 8 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s and still doing stuff that I probably shouldn't have been doing. I had this friend Charles, who was kind of notorious in our friend group for finding cool places to explore, like abandoned buildings and old factories. If it was somewhere you weren't supposed to be, Charles had probably already been there and can tell you exactly how to get in. He spent a weird amount of time on Google Earth and these niche urbex forums, and he'd always be hitting the group chat with screenshots of random places he wanted to check out. Most of us would entertain his ideas, but never actually follow through. I was usually the exception. Charles and I had been friends since high school, and I think the reason we got along so well was that we had similar thresholds for risk. While most of our friends would hear his pitches and go, "That sounds insane," I'd hear them and go, "When are we going?" It was a dynamic that led to some great memories and a few situations that I look back on now and genuinely wonder how we made it out unscathed. This story is about one of those situations. One weekend, Charles texted me about a fire lookout tower he'd found deep in some forest not far away from us. I really wish I could remember the name of the forest, but I can't. Charles said it had been decommissioned years ago and was just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, completely untouched. He didn't tell me how he'd found it, but I didn't want to know. He was convinced we could hike out to it, climb it, and spend the night up there. I was more skeptical. I mean, things like that are usually fenced off or at least protected somehow, but I promised him I'd at least come and check it out. To be fair, the idea of being 70 feet or so up in the middle of a forest with a 360-degree view sounded incredible to me. We picked a random weekend and made it happen. Charles planned the entire thing out, including the drive, what to pack, and how to find the tower once we were in the woods. It was a 3-hour drive away, and Charles told me the hike would be off the trail, but pretty short, about 4 miles or so. We drove out early in the morning on Friday and made it into the woods sometime in the afternoon. For some reason, I was kind of expecting us to get lost, or at the very least not find the tower, which is exactly why I was all the more astonished when we actually did. Seeing it through the trees for the first time was an insane sight. I remember blurting out "no fucking way" when I saw how tall it was. I was even more astonished when we got to the base of it and realized it was completely unprotected or fenced off. It was just sitting there in the middle of the woods waiting for us to find it. The cab at the top was this small, square room with windows on all 4 sides. There was a metal staircase that zigzagged up the frame, with a section of vertical ladder for the final stretch up to the cab. The whole thing looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Some of the lower railings were bent or missing, and there was graffiti on the support beams near the base. To be completely honest, it did not look like the type of structure anyone would be eager to climb, but Charles was practically giddy. While I was hesitating and debating whether I should try convincing him to back out, he had already started climbing. I yelled at him to be careful, and that got him to slow down. I figured what the hell, and told myself to stop bitching. The two of us made our way up carefully, checking the stairs as we went. Most of them felt solid enough, but there were a few spots where the bolts had rusted through and the steps wobbled. The vertical ladder section near the top was the sketchiest part. It was 20-something feet of straight climbing with nothing but a narrow metal cage around it. The adrenaline rush was insane, but that's what Charles lived for. He made it up without any issues. The view from the cab was unreal. You could see for miles in every direction. We had also timed it perfectly. The sun was maybe an hour from setting. Our plan was to camp out for the night and catch the sunrise. There was a decently wide wraparound walkway up there, which is where we decided to chill, at least initially. We cracked a few beers and just enjoyed the view and some conversation. The sun eventually went down, and the sky went from orange to purple to dark blue in a matter of minutes. Once the light was gone, the forest below us was just a black mass in every direction. There wasn't a single light in sight. The stars were incredible, easily the best I've ever seen. But being alone out there in the dark was freaking me out a little. It was just weird not being able to see anything, despite knowing there was a whole forest below us. Charles could tell I was getting a little antsy, and he started messing with me, grabbing my shoulder and stuff like that. But the thing that pissed me off the most was when he smacked his metal water bottle against the side of the tower. It sent this incredibly loud, echoing clang in every direction, probably to be heard for miles. The sound was so loud and ominous that I actually got mad at him. I told him I wanted to go inside the cab, and he finally got the hint. There wasn't much in there, by the way. It had clearly been hollowed out ages ago. He said he was going to finish his beer before coming in and joining me, and I was fine with that. I picked a random corner and started setting my sleeping stuff up. But before I could finish, he told me in a very quiet, serious voice to come back outside. Very un-Charles-like. So I did. I walked back around to where he was sitting and saw that he was pointing diagonally downwards, toward the forest below us. At first I thought he was just messing with me again, but it only took me a few seconds to realize what he was pointing at. There was a light down there. It was faint and pretty far away, but it was definitely down there, and it was genuinely horrifying. It was weaving through the forest at what seemed like walking pace, and my first thought was that it was a person who'd heard the clang from the tower. I don't know why I felt the urge to whisper, but I did. I told him he was stupid for doing that, and we were probably moments away from getting caught or arrested or something. He looked at me with this confused expression before saying, "You think that's a person?" Now it was my turn to be confused. What the hell was he talking about? I asked him what else it could be, and he said that light was moving way too evenly. He wasn't exactly wrong. The light wasn't swinging or wobbling the way you'd expect someone carrying a lantern or flashlight to be. But then again, it was probably too far away to tell. I didn't say anything after that. Neither did Charles. He just kept staring at this mysterious light as it continued weaving through the forest. Part of me thought it was just some random hiker that had nothing to do with us, but I knew that was wishful thinking. After a few minutes, it was obvious that the light was getting closer. It was also much clearer that the light was moving perfectly, like it was floating or hovering. Charles asked me what we should do, and I didn't have an answer for him. There wasn't really anything we could do. Like, what were we gonna do, climb down? As we were throwing out more theories, the light suddenly zipped forward, like it skipped a beat. It was really thick, but for a split second that light went from steady, even movement to an abrupt zip forward. Then it was back to steady movement again. I started feeling my palms start to sweat, and I could tell Charles was really freaked out too. I kept trying to convince myself that whoever was down there was just wandering aimlessly through the woods, but again, wishful thinking. They were definitely heading for the tower, and after about 10 minutes, they reached it. At that point, the light was directly below us, and I was bracing myself for someone to yell up to us and announce themselves as police. But no, the light just stopped moving and stayed in that exact spot right below us. From our vantage point straight above, we could see the light itself, but not whoever was holding it. Charles and I stared at it for a while. The suspense was killing me, but it must have been killing Charles even more, because he again did something I wanted to throw him off the tower for. This guy actually yelled, "Hey, are you good?" down at the light, revealing our presence. I looked at him in horror. I genuinely couldn't believe he would do something so stupid. We didn't get a response though, and the light didn't even move. We waited a little bit, and then Charles yelled down again, but still nothing. So there we were, 70 feet up in an abandoned fire tower in the middle of nowhere, with someone or something blocking our only exit. We were completely trapped. We must have watched that light for 30 minutes straight, whispering to each other every so often. It never moved once. I wasn't worried about being secretive anymore. Charles had burned that bridge a long time ago, so I did something I should have done a while ago. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it straight down at the base of the tower. But even after I did that, I still couldn't see the source of the light. Eventually, we accepted that there was nothing we could do and tried to go back to what we were doing. We went back to talking, but I made sure I never took my eyes off that light for more than a few seconds. Charles thought it was some kind of LED that someone had placed there to mess with us, but who the hell would bother doing that? At some point, Charles said he was going to climb down and check it out, and I told him that was insane. Not only was that inviting trouble, but it was downright stupid and dangerous. As we were arguing about it, I glanced down and realized that I couldn't see the light anymore. There was just darkness and more darkness down there again. I frantically scanned the emptiness below us with my eyes, looking for the light, but it wasn't there anymore. Charles seemed relieved, but I was the opposite. He kept telling me to relax, saying whoever had been there had probably left, but I was more freaked out than I had been when the light was just sitting there motionlessly. The thought that someone could be down there, and now we couldn't even see them, was terrifying to me. Charles reassured me that we'd obviously be able to hear if anyone tried to climb the ladder, which I guessed was true, but I was still really unsettled. Suddenly, I didn't want to be in the open air anymore. I suggested that we wait out the rest of the night from inside the cab, and he agreed. So we went inside and set up our sleeping bags. Neither of us were going to sleep though. That was suicide. Staying awake turned out to be the right decision, because not 20 minutes after going inside, we started hearing noises. The first ones were all metallic clangs that echoed up through the steel frame of the tower. They weren't footsteps, which I want to be crystal clear about, because I was listening specifically for footsteps, and this was not that. It sounded more like someone struck one of the support beams with a wrench or a crowbar. A few minutes later, another one came. This one was more of a grinding sound, like metal being twisted against metal, and it lasted for a good few seconds before stopping. Charles and I kept looking at each other like we were expecting the other one to do something, but there was nothing we could do. The sounds kept coming from what sounded like different spots, which was what really got me because it meant whatever was causing them was moving down there. The sounds continued on and off for a while. I kept trying to map out the sounds in my head, figure out where they were coming from, how many sources there were, whether they were getting closer or staying at the same level. I couldn't make sense of any of it. Charles and I were whispering to each other about what we'd do if we started hearing someone walking up. I was sitting against the far wall of the cab, facing the windows on the opposite side. Charles was on the opposite side, looking over my shoulder. There were so many windows in there that we didn't feel safe and wanted to be able to see out of all of them. There wasn't much to see though. They were all pretty dark, with the only light being from the stars and the moon. But then, I saw something. A dark outline moved across the glass. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing fast enough, but then it passed in front of the next pane over, and that's what did it. I couldn't help but yell, and Charles scrambled away from the window. The two of us immediately ran over to the door and pressed our backs against it. If someone tried to come through that door, they were going to have to push through both of us. I kept looking for the figure through the windows, but I couldn't see anything. That was impossible though. Unless they were crawling on all fours, I should have been able to see them. Charles and I sat up like that for a really long time, and I could hear him hyperventilating. What followed was the most tense and terrifying few hours of my life. Charles and I sat there in that exact position like our lives depended on it. By the time the sun started coming up, I was completely exhausted. When it was finally light enough to see, I counted to 3 and then swung the door open violently, expecting someone to be crouching behind it, but there was no one there. Charles and I ran around the side of it to confirm that, and it was clear. I looked down to the base of the tower, and there was nothing down there either. We grabbed our stuff and started descending as fast as we could. We made it about 3/4 of the way down the staircase before Charles stopped in front of me. He just stood on the landing, staring down at the next section of stairs. I looked past him and saw it immediately. An entire section of the staircase was gone. It wasn't just a few steps. I'm talking about an entire section of stairs, straight up missing. It was impossible, but we were staring at it. Someone had deconstructed an entire section of staircase during the night while we were sitting directly above them. That must have been what those sounds were. But that didn't make sense. The noises didn't stop until after I had seen the person up there. So had they really crossed that gap twice? In the dark? No way. Plus, there's absolutely no chance someone could have done that without us hearing it. That would have been a lot louder than a few clangs here and there. We stood on that landing for a while, trying to figure out what to do. We had to just jump across. It wasn't that far, but it was still scary. Charles ended up twisting his ankle, but I was fine. We made it the rest of the way down, and that was that. There was no one waiting for us at the bottom. There was actually nothing there at all, including the metal steps that had been removed, at least as far as we could tell. Granted, we didn't look around too much. It didn't make any sense, but we weren't sticking around. I still don't have an explanation for any of it. Not the light, not the sounds, not the figure I saw outside the window, and definitely not how someone managed to remove an entire section of steel staircase in the middle of the night without us hearing it. Every time I see Charles, this is something we still talk about. I go camping alone a few times a year. I've been doing it since I was in my 20s, and at this point I'm in my late 30s, so close to 15 years of solo trips at this point. I know the risks, which is why I carry a rifle. This happened about 2 years ago in the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky. It's a massive stretch of forest, over 700,000 acres, and if you know where to go, you can hike for days without seeing another person. I had a rough stretch of work and my head wasn't in a great place, and I felt like I just needed a few days away from everything. I drove out on a Thursday morning. I parked at a trailhead off a Forest Service road and started hiking. The plan was simple: 3 nights in the backcountry. That was pretty much it. I had my tent, my pack, enough food and water for 4 days, and my .308 bolt action that I always bring on solo trips. The first day was exactly what I needed. I covered about 7 miles before finding a flat spot near a creek bed that looked like a good place to camp. I I set up my tent, gathered some wood, and had a fire going by the time the sun started going down. I cooked some food, drank a beer, and sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. The whole time, I didn't see a single person. I fell asleep around 10. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what woke me. It was more like my brain just switched on for no reason, the way it does sometimes when you're sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. I lay there for a minute and stared at the ceiling of my tent, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something. There was a faint orangey glow coming through the walls of my tent. I unzipped the tent flap and looked out. Maybe 200 yards away, through the trees, there was a fire. Not a big one, it was about the size of a campfire, but it was definitely there. It was flickering, which is how I knew it was a fire. I watched it for a few minutes, waiting to hear talking or something. I wanted to confirm it wasn't some random forest fire, but after a while of looking at it, I couldn't see or hear anything beyond the fire. I watched it a little while longer just to see if it would grow out of control, but it didn't. I figured it was another camper set up nearby that I just hadn't noticed during the day. It wasn't impossible, especially since I had gone to sleep relatively early. I figured whoever it was had gone to sleep and left their fire going, which is irresponsible but not uncommon. I watched it for about 5 more minutes, and then zipped my tent back up and went to sleep. It didn't bother me too much. When I woke up the next morning, the fire was the first thing I thought about. Not because it had scared me, but because I was curious. I wanted to see who else was out there, maybe say hi, but mostly to satisfy my curiosity. I packed up my campsite and hiked in the direction where the fire had been. It took me about 10 minutes to reach the area. I was pretty confident I had the right spot. There was a natural clearing that lined up with the angle I'd been looking from. But when I got there, I stopped. There was no fire pit, nor was there a ring of stones or a pile of ash or scorched ground, charred wood, nothing. The ground was completely undisturbed. I walked the whole clearing, checking for any sign that someone had been there, but there was no signs of life whatsoever. The area was pristine. I stood there for a while, genuinely confused. I was certain I'd seen a fire. It had been a campfire burning clearly for at least 5 minutes while I watched it, and yet the ground where it should have been looked like no one had set foot there in months. I considered the possibility that I had the wrong spot, but there wasn't another clearing anywhere near the right distance or direction. There wasn't much I could do beyond that though, so I just moved on. I still had 2 more nights planned, and I wasn't about to cut my trip short over something silly like that. I hiked for most of the day. The terrain changed as I moved deeper into the forest. The creek bed fell away behind me and the ground started climbing. By mid-afternoon, I was in a denser, older section of the forest where the trees were taller and the canopy was thick enough to block out most of the sky. It was quieter in there, which was nice. I found a good campsite around 4. That evening was uneventful. I doused my fire a little after 9 and turned in for the night. I don't know what time it was when the sound woke me up, but it was loud enough to pull me out of a dead sleep. I woke up to this distant, enormous cracking sound, like a thick branch being snapped in half, except it kept going. It was violent, and it lasted for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. At the tail end of it, there was a deep, resonant thud that I could quite literally feel in the ground beneath me. I instantly knew what it was. A tree had fallen somewhere deeper in the woods, or at the very least, a very large branch. If you've ever heard the sound of a tree falling before, which I do understand is kind of a rare occurrence, it's amazing and terrifying at the same time. It didn't scare me per se, but the deafening force and scale of it gave me this crazy adrenaline rush. I lay there in my sleeping bag, trying to figure out what had just caused it. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. It wasn't storming, and there was barely any wind. There was nothing I could think of that would have brought a tree down on a night like this, but there was also nothing I could do. I couldn't fall asleep at that point either. My heart was still racing, and the adrenaline had me awake, so I just kind of closed my eyes and waited for it to wear off. But then, not 10 minutes later, it happened again. Only this time, it was much louder. That same gruesome crackling sound, followed by a crash of branches and a deafening thud, but this one was close. Not right on top of me, but close enough that the sound was almost disorienting, and it came from a completely different direction than the first one. The first tree had fallen somewhere to the south, and the second one was to my northwest. I sat up immediately. Now I was actually scared. 2 trees falling on the same night in 2 different parts of the forest with no wind and no storm. That was inconceivable. I kept trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. The most logical thought was that the first one had caused some kind of chain reaction, but that hypothesis didn't account for the fact that the trees fell in completely different parts of the forest. Whatever brought down the first tree had nothing to do with the second one. They were 2 different events. But that was even more inconceivable. I was sitting there processing all of this when I heard something new. Something that took my fear from a medium 5 to a resounding 10. It was this low and continuous rumbling sound that I can only describe as a cross between a groan and a growl. Like a person clearing their throat, except it didn't stop. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. I've heard bears, I've heard elk, I've heard bobcats. This wasn't any of those. It sounded like something was making the noise on purpose, and it went on for what felt like a full minute without any break or variation. I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed my rifle, chambered around as quietly as I could, and aimed it at the tent flap. At that point, I was full on panicking. I must have sat like that for 20 minutes. The sound eventually tapered off. It didn't stop abruptly, it kind of faded out, like whatever was making it had moved further away. And just like that, the forest was quiet again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I don't think I would have been able to if I tried. It was the worst night of my life. As soon as I saw daylight, I got out of the tent. I packed up as quickly as possible, still spooked and extremely unsettled despite being able to see. Once everything was in my pack, I started walking in the direction of the second tree, the louder and closer one. I needed to see it, if only to confirm that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I had my rifle ready in my hands, so I found the tree after about 10 minutes. The thing was massive, and its trunk was lying at an angle across a shallow slope. Broken branches and debris were scattered all around it, so it was real. I really couldn't believe it. I'd been trying to convince myself I had just imagined everything from the night before, but there it was. I needed to keep investigating. I wouldn't have been satisfied leaving without knowing what had caused the fall. I walked over the stump, which was about 3 feet high. The wood where it had broken was pale and fresh, but the break wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind of jagged, splintered fracture you get from wind stress or root failure. The wood around the break point had been torn apart in a way that I had never seen before. Parts of the stump looked like they'd been gouged. I really don't know how else to describe it. There were long, irregular grooves running through the wood at different angles, and it looked like some of them were up to an inch deep, at least. The wood genuinely looked like it had been stripped and chewed rather than cut or snapped. The more I looked, the more I noticed. Some of the bark around the base had been peeled away in long strips, and the exposed wood underneath had that same gouged, chewed-up look. I can't pretend I knew what I was looking at, because I didn't. I'd seen beaver damage before, and this was not that. Beavers leave clean cuts. I'd seen woodpecker damage, and this wasn't that either. This was aggressive, messy, and covered way too much surface area to be any animal I could think of. The tree hadn't fallen because it was dead or because the wind knocked it over. Something had worked on that trunk until it came down, and suddenly I felt this really nasty feeling in my gut. I needed to leave. I stopped examining the tree and started backing away, but as I was turning to leave, something near one of the tree branches caught my eye. There was a small cluster of items sitting on the ground. If it weren't for the fact that they looked man-made, I wouldn't have even bothered checking them out. As soon as I saw what they were, I lost my shit. It was a blue bandana and a carabiner, and they were both my items. I instantly started digging through my pack and confirmed those 2 items were missing. In that moment, I grabbed my stuff, shoved it in my backpack, and ran. I didn't know if running was the right decision, if that would have attracted attention to me, but I did anyway. I just needed to get out of those woods. I got tired after a while under the weight of all my stuff, but I moved as fast as I could. The hike back took me most of the day, and the entire time I felt like I was being stalked or watched. I felt like something was going to jump out from somewhere any second. I kept my rifle in my hands the entire time. I made it back to my car around 3 in the afternoon. I drove out of there so fast, despite my exhaustion. The first thing I did when I got to a safe distance away was call the police. I don't think they took me very seriously, but I didn't care. I also knew there probably wasn't much they could do, but I didn't care about that either. I was pretty messed up for days afterward. None of it made any sense whatsoever. What I couldn't get over was the fact that my stuff had been rummaged through. Something had either stalked me through the woods or knew where I was the entire time. That unexplainable fire from the first night must have had something to do with it. There's no way that was a coincidence. And those trees, I still have no explanation for what could have cut them down. I genuinely don't think it was anything human, but as for what animal it could have been, I have no idea. I still go camping, believe it or not, but this is something that I think will hang over me forever.
I'll never forget the time my sister Danielle and I were home alone one Friday night when our parents were out. I was 12 and she was 13. We have an average-sized house, but you can hear everything going on in there. For example, you could be on the top floor and hear someone talking down in the den. We were both doing our own things in our rooms upstairs. That's when I heard it. A slight tapping coming from downstairs in the den. I soon realized it sounded like tapping on the back door. I assumed it was Danielle, so I went down to the den. It was too dark outside to see who was out there, so I flipped on the outside light. It wasn't my sister, but a random guy. He looked mid-40s, long black hair, graying a bit, red cheeks, probably 6'1". Being that this was our backyard door and some stranger was standing on the outside of it, I almost ran away. But the guy was staring at me with a kind of unintimidating look, as if he needed help. I slightly pushed the door window screen open so he could talk to me. He told me he needed to use our phone. I asked him why and why he was in our backyard. He disregarded what I had said and pleaded for me to let him in. I told him sorry and asked him to leave before I would call the cops. I tried to slide the door window back up, but he actually blocked it with his arm and began reaching into my house trying to unlock the door. When I cried for my sister, the guy pulled his arm away. I ran upstairs where I met my sister halfway. She took a peek through the den stairway to the back door and saw the guy standing there still. She called our parents. They told us to call the police and to stay upstairs. We both stayed in our rooms for a while. There was no more tapping or anything, so me being my 12-year-old self trying to be brave, I went downstairs to the den. He wasn't standing by the door anymore, but the door window was lower than when I had left it. Then I realized I didn't shut it in the first place. I walked closer to the door and then looked to my left. The door to the office was now open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. It was too dark to see anything inside, and there was no way I was going in there. I took out my phone, opened the camera, turned on the flash, and pressed the button. As the phone took the picture, the flash from the camera provided enough light to see the guy who was standing at the door was now hunched over my office desk, and in the picture his head was turned to be facing me. I didn't know if he was running at me or not, but I felt like he was, and I ran upstairs and locked the den door. A familiar light tapping began coming from the den door now, and I could hear the man on the other side begging me to open it. I cried for my sister again and bluffed to the man, saying the cops were here. After that he stopped, and I could hear the back door open and shut. It may have been stupid to say that, as it ruined any chances of the man getting caught and arrested, but it may have also saved our lives, as the cops did not arrive for another 5 minutes. This story is told under the author's father's point of view. Me and my girlfriend's brother had been talking about hunting, and I decided to take him on a hunting trip. It was his first time going, so I wanted to take him somewhere where I was sure he would get a deer. So I asked my uncle if we could go to his place, and he told me we could stay there for the weekend. I told him that was perfect and that we'd stay. Me and Adam got our stuff together and headed that way. It was a secluded property right smack dab in the middle of nowhere in Braxton County, West Virginia. We got to my uncle's. He had his truck started and told them to hop in. We get in, and I ask him where we're going. He told me to my hunting cabin about 10-15 miles out. When we finally made it to the cabin, it fell below our expectations. 2 rooms, very small. As soon as we unloaded our stuff, he was gone. He told us to have fun and waved goodbye from his truck. Later, when we were getting settled for the night, we realized there were no curtains or lights, just lanterns. We didn't like being so exposed, so we hung clothes over the windows. Not long after, we climbed into bed. Then within a few minutes, there was a noise outside, like metal trash cans being banged against one another. Adam started to get paranoid until I said, "It's probably just a bear or something, go back to sleep." I told Adam, "Don't wake me up unless the cabin's on fire." I went back to sleep, at least until Adam started shaking me, saying, "Cliff, wake up, there's someone outside." "No, go back to sleep, there's no one." I stopped, because on the outside wall, besides Adam's bed, a noise, almost like someone or something was raking its claws or nails all the way down the side of the cabin and stopped at the far window. The noise was followed by tapping on the window. Neither of us wanted to move the clothes to see what it was. I told Adam to load his gun, as I did myself. We stayed up all night and left in the morning. We questioned my uncle if he was playing a trick on us. He didn't have a clue what we were talking about. The author says his dad never went back to that cabin. The picture attached was taken by his uncle before he left them, and you could see the cabin in the background. I was 19 years old at the time, working at a sketchy motel. The motel was pretty run down, and the majority of people who stayed there were locals that were just doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. Let's just say the cops came by multiple times a week. I worked as both a front desk person, checking in these creeps all hours of the night, and as a housekeeper who got to clean up their nasty, vomit-smelling rooms afterwards. One afternoon, I was working as a housekeeper in the second building of the motel on the backside furthest from the office. I hated working over there because it not only had the most worn-down rooms, but it was always pretty vacant over there and way too quiet for comfort. I began cleaning one of my last rooms and wanted to get done in a hurry because it was getting late. I was washing the mirror in the room that I was cleaning when all of a sudden, I saw a man in the reflection staring at me. He was mid-50s, dirty, with long, greasy hair. Startled, I screamed, "Oh my God." I told him he scared me. The room I was currently cleaning was vacant, so there was no reason why this man should have been in there watching me clean. However, we just had a meeting on customer satisfaction, and my boss was really pressuring us to be more polite and help the guests any way we could. Sir?" I asked him cautiously. Can I get you anything? Towels?" The man just stared back at me with a crooked grin and held out his hands to me. I thought maybe he was handing me a tip for cleaning his room earlier, but when I looked down, I saw he was holding a $100 bill. Alarms started going off in my head. No one tips $100 on a $40 a night room. The man just smiled and said his name was Terry. He said he was staying in the room next door with his wife Sherry and sort of joked about their names rhyming. He smelled like car oil and alcohol. When I asked him why he was trying to hand me $100, he laughed deep in his throat and said, "Me and my wife were watching you, and we just wanted to have fun with you." I felt like my heart jumped into my throat. No, I can't do that, sir, I'm sorry." I wanted to run out of the room screaming, but he was blocking the door, my only exit. The man smiled again, taking on a softer tone of voice, and invited me to come into his room to meet his wife, just to talk as friends. I nervously told him no again, and that I had a lot of work to do for the day. I prayed to God he would just go away, and eventually he did. He grunted and walked off in what I assumed to be the direction of his room. My mind began racing. There is no wife, I thought. This man could try and kidnap me. I was 110 pounds at the time and not very strong. He could easily overpower me. I locked the room from the inside and went directly to the phone to call my manager at the front desk, but the phone wasn't working. Adrenaline began pumping through my veins, and despite what I was always told not to do, I was panicking. Did he cut the line? No, I thought. This is a crappy motel. It happens all the time. But I just have to get out. I remembered that I had my cell phone out on my housekeeping card, but that was outside the locked door. I'd have to open the door to get it. I cautiously opened the door to the room that I was cleaning and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I frantically began searching my cart for my cell phone. I was wasting too much time looking for it, so I just decided to run as fast as I could and make a break for the front desk in the office. Then from behind me, I heard the man again, but this time he was screaming to someone else, "She's running, she's getting away." I could hear his shoes slamming against the pavement after me. I quickly turned the corner, grabbed my keycard, and let myself into a stockroom and locked the door. Within moments, I heard the sound of the dirty guy and someone else running outside, searching for me. I stayed in that stockroom for 30 minutes shaking until I could no longer hear him searching for me. I finally got the courage to run the rest of the way to the front desk. When I made it there, I collapsed into my boss's arms and he called the police. The man and whoever else was in the room with him peeled out before the cops could arrive, and I was beyond shaken up. According to the police who ran a search, this wasn't the first time he had done something like this, and he was actually wanted for sexual assault, gross sexual imposition, and in the past was once charged with rape. A few weeks later, on what happened to be my birthday, this guy was caught. A few weeks after that, I quit. I will never again work at another motel.
My name is Patrick McCabe. I've always had really messed up teeth growing up, like atrociously bad. Due to that and a few other things, I got my wisdom teeth out really late in life. Most people who undergo the process get them out sometime in high school or at the very latest early into their college years, but I was different. I didn't even sit down for a consultation until after graduating college. The process was incredibly painful and one of the most irritating things I've gone through in my entire life. I'm not going to bore you with all the details about my recovery, but there is something you need to know. For whatever reason, the pain I was experiencing was so bad that I couldn't sleep through the night without taking pain medication. I developed this system where I would wake myself up every 3 hours to take another pill, cycling between the 2 medications I'd been prescribed. It was awful, but it was the only thing I could do to prevent these massive toothaches that would quite literally have me in tears. It should go without saying that my sleep schedule was downright awful during that period. My body started getting used to 3-hour cycles of sleep, followed by periods of being awake, and it was difficult to return to normal even after my recovery was over. That was honestly the worst part, the sleep. It was not normal, I'm telling you. I didn't even feel human after a while. It was like I had become something else, constantly waking up and going back to sleep. I don't even want to think about it. One night, I'm pretty sure it was during the first week of recovery, I was up at like 4 a.m. to take my meds again. For whatever reason, I couldn't fall back asleep afterwards. I don't know if it was because of my condition or because the AC had stopped working, but it was really hot in my room, way hotter than usual. I remember tossing and turning for like 10 minutes before deciding I had to do something about the heat. The only thing I could think of was to open my bedroom window, which I did. That helped a little bit, but I still couldn't sleep. So there I was, lying there miserably in bed, praying with every fiber of my being that I just fall asleep. But of course, I didn't. At one point, I started picking up on this strange noise coming from outside my window. I never slept with my window open, so at first, I figured it was just some normal outside sound that I wasn't used to hearing. But the more I listened, the more I got the feeling that it wasn't a normal sound. It sounded almost like scratching, as if some kind of animal were dragging its claws on something. That's the best way I can describe it. At one point, the noise got louder, and I realized it sounded like it was coming from above me, from the roof. And then, a few seconds later, the noise started moving above me, gradually fading out of earshot. I was pretty positive at that point that it was some kind of critter messing around on the roof. My family lives in a woodsy area, so we've had our fair share of curious raccoons and pest infestations. I really wanted to just ignore it and go back to sleep, but I knew my dad would be livid if something burrowed into our attic again, so I had to do something. Plus, it wasn't like I was on the brink of falling asleep anyway. I was wide awake. So without much thought, I threw my covers off, jumped out of bed, and started making my way to the garage. From there, I grabbed one of my dad's heavy-duty flashlights and walked back through the house to the back door. My room sits on the first floor near the back of the house where the roof is the lowest, so I figured I'd check over there first. I made it to the spot outside my bedroom window and started sweeping the flashlight beam across the roof. I didn't see anything up there, so I sighed and figured the animal had crawled to a different part of the roof in the time it had taken me to get outside. I started walking around the house, trying my best to illuminate as much of the roof as possible. All I really needed to do was scare the animal away, which would be pretty easy if I could just find the damn thing. I was standing near the front of the house where the roof is nearly twice as high when I spotted something shift in the corner of my flashlight beam. With one quick flick of my wrist, I shot the flashlight toward the spot I had seen movement and nearly passed out. There, standing on the roof, was a person. Not an animal, not a pack of animals, but a fully grown human being. There was a naked human being standing on my roof, frozen in the beam of my flashlight. I screamed, I couldn't help it, and as soon as I did, the person on the roof started moving, almost like they were allergic to the light of my flashlight. I tried to trace their movements with the light, but they were absurdly fast. Until that moment, I didn't know it was possible to move so fast barefoot, let alone on the loose shingles of an uneven roof. They started making their way back to where my room was, and I sprinted around the house to intercept them. I don't even know what I was thinking. I should have just ran back inside, but there was some deep instinct in me that prevented me from backing off. I yelled for my dad as I ran, hoping he'd be able to get outside in time to help me ward off or restrain the psycho on our roof. I made it to the back of the house just in time to see the person preparing to jump off the roof. My first thought was that there was no way. There was absolutely no way a person could jump off that roof without suffering serious injuries, even from that lower point. Surely they'd have to find another way down. But without hesitation, the person jumped, slamming into the concrete with a deafening thump. The shock of what I was seeing had me frozen in place at that point. I couldn't even process what was going on because of how insane it was that someone had actually just jumped off our roof. I don't know how he didn't shatter every bone in his legs. My dazed shock only lasted a split second, but that was enough. The person immediately got up off the paver stones and charged toward me, tackling me to the ground. He started clawing at my eyes, almost like he was trying to rip my face off. I screamed and kicked, but I couldn't get him off me. He was grunting and spitting, and there was no logical explanation for how someone like that could be so strong. I started feeling blood pouring down my face, and in that moment, I thought I was going to die. But then, over the sound of my own screaming, I heard the back door burst open. Seconds later, my dad was pulling the person off of me, cursing and yelling like it was life or death. I got up off the ground just in time to see that psycho breaking free of my dad's grasp, completely covered in my blood. Instead of continuing to attack me or my dad, he ran to the edge of our yard, scaled our backyard fence, and disappeared into the darkness. My dad and I stood there in shock while the sounds of his footsteps crashing through the forest faded into the distance. I'll fast forward through the rest. I had to go to the hospital that night. My dad almost crashed just trying to get me there. I had lost a ton of blood, and the doctors had to give me all sorts of shots to prevent me from getting any infections or diseases that guy might have had. It was a nightmare. The one saving grace was that my mouth was basically untouched, so my teeth didn't need to be re-examined. The police were useless, not like they could have done much anyway. They said searching the woods would be unfeasible given how vast it was, and insisted that simple security cameras would have prevented the whole thing. My dad later discovered that the person on the roof had been trying to dig into our attic, just like an animal would. Ironically, it wasn't my dad or me who was the most affected. It was my mom. She cried about this incident so many times, and she was actually the one who went ahead and upped our home security. I still have no explanation for what happened that night. Who that guy was, where he had come from, and how he had even found our house are just a few of the 1,000 questions about that night that I fear will never be answered. My house is a very unique design. Well, I call it unique, but I bet a lot of people would call it weird instead. And actually, they have. The vast majority of friends I've hosted have all said so, even a handful of girls I've snuck in while my parents were away. As much as I'd love to make things easy for myself and just attach a bunch of photos of the house, I don't think my parents would appreciate that too much. So instead, I'll just tell you the important details. As it pertains to the story, there's really only one you need to know. You know how most houses have a porch or a walkway leading up to the front door, and there's usually some sort of covering above the door, maybe called a door canopy? Well, my house basically has a covered hallway that you have to walk through before entering the actual interior. Imagine your own front door, part of the house on either side, and then push the front door entrance back, into the house so to speak. It's essentially like walking in between two parts of the house without even being inside. This is all to say that my bedroom is on the first floor, right next to the external hallway that leads to the front door. If I stand up and look out the window next to my bed, I can actually see anyone standing at the front door, but they'd have their back to me. Hopefully that description makes sense. I developed a habit at a really young age of peeping out that window whenever a delivery person or a guest would ring the doorbell. It was like having a little hidden camera that I could use to check who was there before stepping in full view of the door. What I'm about to tell you happened just a few months ago, at the very beginning of the summer. My parents were out of town for the week, so I decided to take advantage of the situation and let my girlfriend Anna sleep over for a few days. Normally, my strict and traditional parents would be very opposed to anything like that, but what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them. Plus, they'd met Anna a million times, so it wasn't like I was bringing an unwelcome stranger into our home. The first night was relatively uneventful, just a chill movie night with some snacks and a few glasses of wine. We went to sleep at a reasonable hour and went for a dip in the pool the following morning. I'm not really much of a party person, and neither is Anna, so we were more than happy to just spend some time together relaxing, playing games, and watching TV. The second night was when things went down. It was probably sometime around midnight. We were pillow talking in the dark, about to go to sleep, when I heard something from outside. It sounded like a screeching, or something being dragged. I shushed Anna and listened, trying to figure out what I was hearing. It sounded like it was coming from the driveway, which is off to the side of the house. That alarmed me, mostly because it meant the sound was coming from really close to the actual house. I listened a little while longer, and realized it was the sound of one of my dad's trash cans being moved around. He sometimes keeps them in front of the garage, and I was pretty positive I had seen a couple of them out there earlier that day. My first thought was that he hadn't fully emptied them and some animal was poking around looking for scraps or food or something. Still though, animal or not, hearing things moving around in your driveway is creepy, especially when you're the only one home and it's too dark to see anything. I told Anna to stay put, telling her that I was going to go shoo away the raccoon or other animal that was rummaging through the trash. Then, I calmly walked out of my room and over to the front door. I flicked on the switch for the exterior lights, but they didn't illuminate the driveway enough for me to see anything, just the front yard and the porch. So, reluctantly, I opened the door and walked outside, hoping my presence would be enough to scare off whatever was out there. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, waiting to hear scampering or see an animal run across the yard, but nothing happened. In fact, even the sound of the trash can had stopped. I figured there was a slim chance that whatever had been there had already run away, but concluded it was unlikely since I had been watching and listening the whole time. So, even more reluctantly, I clicked on my phone flashlight and started walking down the front steps toward the driveway. As I got closer, I realized that one of the trash cans had indeed been messed with. Two of them were sitting against the garage door, but one of them was completely overturned, with its contents scattered across the driveway. I groaned, knowing I was going to have to clean up the mess. I should mention that I didn't see anything out there, even after approaching, so I figured the animal had slunk away without me noticing. Just to be completely sure, I shined my flashlight all around the trash cans, but there was still nothing there. So that confirmed it. Without much more thought, I started picking stuff up from the driveway and throwing it back in the trash can. After I finished with that, I went back inside, opened the garage door, moved the trash cans inside, and locked it. I didn't want to run the risk of something returning later and waking me up. Then I went back to bed. Anna was still awake, but barely. I could tell she was about to fall asleep, so I gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead and tried to get comfortable on my side of the bed without disturbing her too much. I was in that in-between phase of consciousness and unconsciousness, where you're half dreaming but can pull yourself out of it if you concentrate, and that's when I heard something. This gentle tapping noise, like metal on glass. I was convinced it was part of the half-dream I was having, but something about it was just the slightest bit too unsettling. So instead of succumbing to exhaustion and drifting off into sleep, I opened my eyes and looked around the room. Sure enough, the tapping sound didn't stop. I froze. It hadn't been in my own head. It was coming from somewhere in the room. I didn't move a muscle, I just listened, trying to pinpoint exactly where it was emanating from, or even what it was. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't coming from inside the room at all, even though it sounded so clear. That could only mean one thing though. It was coming from just outside my window. I forced myself out of bed, stood up slowly, and peeked behind the curtain of my bedroom window. In the minimal light from outside, I could see the outline of a person standing at the front door, with their back to me. It was terrifying. I looked for a little while longer, and realized they were lightly tapping on the glass over and over and over again, as if expecting someone to answer the door. But that was insane. It was past midnight, and none of the house lights were on. I tried to make out more details about the person, but I couldn't see anything distinctive without more light. As I was standing there watching them, I noticed them start to turn around. Without thinking, I ducked under the light just in time, and I felt my heart start racing. I must have stayed crouched behind the window for a full minute, terrified that they had seen me. I didn't want to look again, but I had to. With a deep breath, I mustered up the courage to take another look out the window. Slowly, I stood back up, peeled the curtain back, and instantly regretted it. There, just 2 inches from the glass, was a face staring back at me. I yelled and recoiled from the window, yanking the curtain shut again. Even though we were only face to face for a split second, I was able to make out that it was a man with shriveled-looking skin, like someone whose face was melting away. As I fell back onto the bed, still yelling uncontrollably, Anna woke up. I screamed that there was someone outside, then made sure my bedroom door was locked before grabbing my phone and calling the police. The cops showed up a little over 10 minutes later. Anna and I stayed locked in my room the entire time. I really wanted to run to the front door to see where the creep had gone, but Anna was clutching onto my arm and wouldn't let me. When the police finally arrived, I let them inside and told them everything I had seen. They did a quick sweep of the house, and with my help, we confirmed that there was no sign of forced entry, and the entire house was locked up. That put me at ease, but it still didn't explain why that guy was creeping around my house and where he had gone. Eventually, after walking the perimeter with their flashlights and poking around the yard, they told us they didn't find anything unusual. One of them told me to call back should I see that guy again. Then they left. The rest of the week passed without incident. I ended up telling my parents, who, to my surprise, didn't seem overly concerned about it. We don't exactly live in a sketchy neighborhood, so I was surprised that they were being so nonchalant about the whole thing. To be fair though, their reaction made me feel like I was overreacting a little bit. I mean, what had really happened? Some homeless guy had crept around our house? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was making a big deal out of nothing. But if that were the case, I probably wouldn't be writing this. The reason I'm writing this now is because for the past few nights, I've woken up randomly in the middle of the night to strange noises coming from outside my window. Not my trash cans moving around like what I had heard before, but different sounds. I told my dad about them, and he's actually planning on installing some security cameras around the perimeter of our house. But still, I can't help but feel like that guy showing up at my house wasn't a one-off thing. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to send a follow-up. What you're about to hear is an experience that nearly made me lose my mind. It's still something that I think about quite often, if I'm being honest, but I've been able to recover a bit in the months since it's happened. The whole story is pretty quick, so I'll get right into it. I'm a single guy in my mid-30s. I live alone with no pets in a small one-story house. The house is really modest. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, kitchen, dining room, and a tiny garage. That's it. Life is fantastic. Because of my profession, I can work on my own time and don't have to answer to anyone, whether that be a girlfriend, a parent, or an employer. Freedom has always been an imperative part of my life, so I've done my best to maximize it wherever possible. I know a lot of people are different, and a lot of people might actually judge me for my quote, immature lifestyle, but everyone has different priorities and preferences, so as long as no one judges me, I won't judge them. The excess freedom is definitely tethered to its own set of drawbacks though. I've developed some bad habits that I'm sure some people would frown upon. One of them is my sleep schedule, which is god-awful. For some reason, I'm most productive at late hours of the night, so I often find myself staying up until dawn and sleeping into the afternoon. It's just how my body functions, and until I'm absolutely forced to, I don't see a reason to change anything. I was up really late one night. I'm talking past 3 a.m. late. I was sitting at my desk, getting some work done on my computer. I was in the zone, not even listening to music. Imagine yourself at peak hours. That's the kind of groove I was in. The room was dead silent, and I was alone with my thoughts, the sound of my keyboard, and my work. And then, bam, out of nowhere, the silence was interrupted by the sound of footsteps pounding down the hallway towards my bedroom, followed by 3 or 4 bangs on the bedroom door. Like deafening bangs, the type of bangs you'd expect the police trying to barge into a drug den would make. I shot up from my chair so fast I banged my knee on the desk and knocked my monitor over. I was just so shocked, it caught me completely off guard. Just imagine being in your own house at 3 a.m., alone, and complete silence just gets interrupted by banging on your door. It was, and still is, the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Standing up was a pure reaction. I was completely frozen after that. I had my eyes fixated on the door, dreading the moment I knew was coming. The door bursting open and someone barging into my room. Me having to fight a complete stranger in pitch black darkness. But it never came. I didn't hear anything else, not even the sounds of footsteps retreating from the door. It was like I had imagined it, but I was 100% positive I hadn't. I don't know how long I stood there, but I physically could not force myself to move. It was like sleep paralysis, except I hadn't been dreaming. And then, finally, I heard the sounds of footsteps quickly walking back down the hall. So someone had been there. I don't know why, but hearing those footsteps again unlocked my brain. Without thinking, I grabbed an empty beer bottle off my desk, ran to the door, and started chasing after whoever had broken into my home. I didn't even try to be quiet. I screamed at the top of my lungs like a lunatic, hoping that would give me the extra adrenaline I needed. I ran through the entire house, screaming, but I never found anyone. My house isn't that big. There aren't many places someone could hide, but even after checking every room, there was no one there. All the doors and windows were locked too, which was even more confusing. My bout of confidence was completely drained after that, and I felt fear start flooding back in. I sprinted back to my room, locked the door, and called the police. In the time it took the police to arrive, I listened to my surroundings in complete silence, but never heard anything. When the police finally showed up, we searched the house together, but found nothing. One of the officers tried to convince me that whoever had been there had left, but I insisted that everything had been locked up. He told me I had probably overlooked something, and it took everything in me not to curse him out right there. I know for a fact that nothing had been unlocked, but that didn't explain how that person had gotten into and out of my house. Unless I had imagined it, but I know I didn't. For the next week, I was a psychological mess. My brain refused to accept that I had imagined something so vivid, but I couldn't conceive of a possible way that that person had gotten into and out of my house. I'm much better now, but there was a time where I had trouble sleeping, eating, working, everything. Even now, the only explanation I can think of is that I somehow didn't notice an unlocked window or door in my house. Still though, why anyone would crash through my house just to run away is a complete mystery to me.